Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the July 15th Governance and Priorities Committee meeting. I'd like to begin by recognizing that we are on the traditional territories of Snuneymuxw First Nation. Our clerk today is Ms. Sheila Gurry. We also have in attendance Councillor Brown virtually. Thank you for joining us, and Councillor Thorpe sends his regrets. Today's Governance and Priorities Committee meeting will be held in accordance with the Community Charter and Council Procedural Bylaw 2018 number 7272. If during the meeting any member of the gallery has a question regarding an agenda item, please write down your name and the agenda item on the question period sign-up sheet, which is on the table by the double doors to my left. Please note that the Council Procedural Bylaw has been updated and only questions related to reports may be asked. Before we start the meeting, I'd like to take a few minutes to remind those who are in person about the rules of decorum for all council and committee meetings. A meeting of council is intended to be a place where democracy can freely take place in a respectful and safe manner. The council chambers is a workplace, and there are considerations council and staff must make to ensure that a safe work environment exists in accordance with WorkSafe BC regulations. To support this, disrespectful conduct will not be tolerated, so we ask that there be no cheering, jeering, or other outbursts from the gallery at any time. This will ensure that anyone speaking, whether it be a delegation or a member of council or staff, that they're not interrupted and can make their point freely. In instances where a speaker is being inappropriate or has exceeded their time, the microphone will be cut off. Similarly, any outbursts by persons in the gallery will be asked to stop, and if they do not comply, they will be asked to leave as permitted under Section 133 of the Community Charter. If necessary, council may call a recess in order to reset the environment. The first item on the agenda is the introduction of late items. Ms. Gurry.
Thank you, Madam Chair. For late items today, we have for agenda item 6B1, we're adding the PowerPoint presentation titled Nanaimo Builds for the Future. And that's it, Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Gurry. Can I have a motion for the adoption of the agenda as amended? Councillor Perino, Mayor Krogh, all those in favor? Any opposed? I see none opposed. We have no minutes. Agenda planning. Ms. Gurry?
Thank you again, Madam Chair, and good afternoon. For upcoming topics and initiatives, it's on page 3 of your original agenda package, and there is nothing new aside from what you approved at the last Governance and Priorities Committee meeting on June the 12th, other than the upcoming topics and initiatives for October 28th, which has incentives that support city plan, amenity cost charges bylaw project, development cost charge bylaw update project, and DP88 form and character design guidelines. So unless any members of the committee have further additions they'd like to add, there is the meeting in October, which is fairly full, as you can see, and then we have 2 more scheduled GPCs for the remainder of the year, November 25th and December 9th, and there is some future topics with dates to be determined. And that's all I have, unless you have anything.
Thank you, Ms. Gurry. Councillor Perino.
Thank you, Chair. I would like to put on an upcoming agenda the discussion around parking. And can I go ahead and explain my reasoning? Vancouver has started with some new bylaws regarding parking rules, and particularly changing rules around areas where they have more transit. And I think that we need to have a further discussion about this. Certainly, I've always been an advocate of having enough parking, but in some areas, particularly we have good transit, and particularly in our downtown, I think we should be considering what Vancouver is doing, or at least talking about it further. So I'd like to add that to the agenda.
Thank you, Councillor Perino. Do we need a formal motion for that, or can staff just take note?
No, yeah, a formal motion would be wonderful. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I'm not just sure how to state it, so
you could just move that you would wish to have that topic and the rules around parking around adequate transit areas to be a discussion at an upcoming.
That's perfect. Yes, I'll move that. Thank you.
Seconder? Councillor Eastmere, any discussion? Yeah, Councillor Armstrong? Oh, my apologies. Go ahead.
Still waiting for the...
Okay, hang on. I can't get her up.
You were, I think...
Oh, there she is.
We're still waiting for another report to come back on the other parking that we asked for, so could that just be part of the same one that we've already asked for?
Thanks, Chair. To both points, actually, the staff are working on getting ready for a overall parking study this fall. And we're just debating whether to bring a report or send council an email on what would be included in that report, just for information. But I think certainly having the intent would be at a future GPC, so that would be, it aligns perfectly with the motion.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Oh, sorry, did you want to respond, Councillor Perino?
Thank you, Chair. Simply that, you know, the rules around the province are changing, and I think we need to be very aware of that and discuss the different options that are available to us. So that's why I'm bringing this forward. I really appreciate Mr. Sims saying that it's been part of the discussion, but I definitely want to look at things that I would never have thought of before, as far as, you know, having no minimums, different types of things that we have not looked at in the past. So thank you.
Great. Thank you. Councillor Gesselbrock?
Thanks. Just clarity, I guess, like, I think we've passed that we don't have parking minimums anymore in kind of like 2 of our hubs, if I'm not corrected. Yeah, transit hubs, and then, I mean, potentially we could look at the downtown, and there's this report coming. Was that report sort of looking at that? I'm just curious, like, is there any other more areas that you'd want to look at waiving parking minimums, or?
Go ahead.
Thank you. Particularly the downtown, because we have some development lots that are so small that they can't supply parking, but they're so close to the transit areas, and those are the particular areas that I'm more interested in.
Yep.
Okay. Thank you. Let's vote. I'm sorry, I don't have the exact wording, but this is for parking at a GPC, a future GPC. All those in favor? Any opposed? See none opposed. Okay, on to reports. 6A, Empowered Nanaimo. Sorry.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I left my microphone on because it's all me for the first few items. So the report in front of you is bringing back a draft alternative approval process policy upon your request from the June 17th regular council meeting. Council passed a motion to direct staff to prepare a draft policy for GPC committee that includes a method of communication engagement to be considered on a case-by-case basis based on the scale and the borrowing amount of the project, that the number of response forms be limited to 10 forms per person for the duration of the AAP period, and options for the inclusion of mail-out options for response forms and electronic submissions of response forms. So based on that recommendation, the review done by Ms. Lisa Sworn and the recommendations outlined in her report, as well as other research that we had done, we have come back from what we heard from council on that day with a policy that includes the number of electoral response forms provided, and we put the maximum of 10 as suggested by the committee. Methods for receiving response forms other than in person at City Hall and via mail, which Canada Post mail, which we already had. We've added through electronic submission on the City of Nanaimo's website, and this was in consultation, serious consultation with our IT department, where there is a safe and secure way to upload a photograph or a PDF copy to a page on our website to submit a form that way, and it would have the signature on there. Email has a high cybersecurity risk, so IT does not recommend at this time. And at this time, a fully electronic form with e-signatures through DocuSign, etc. We do not have the ability right now to limit how many responses a person can do, and the abuse of that system is a potential. And the signage, the DocuSign, is $3 to $5 per signature, so it's just not feasible at this time until we can put some parameters around it. So in the policy, we are recommending the addition of electronic submissions through the City of Nanaimo's website only. We have the option, which is legislated, to withdraw an electoral response form. So this would, somebody could request to have their form back should they change their mind, as long as it's still within the AAP time period. The certification has not happened, and they provide proof of identification. Communication and engagement strategy for council endorsement. This has also been included in the policy, but as noted in the recommendation originally from this committee, it will be on a case-by-case basis. So obviously, based on the scale and cost of the project, the communication and engagement plan would be changed to suit the either the high borrowing costs and or if there's no borrowing cost and it's an AAP for one of the other reasons that are allowed under the community charter, the communication and engagement could be scaled back and or different types of communication engagement done. So that is what's in front of you, and we are recommending you review and approve the draft policy going forward, and it would be used on any future AAPs the city conducts.
Thank you, Ms. Gurry. Councillor Armstrong.
Thank you. I have some concerns about through the city's website, just looking for some clarification. So like for somebody that has 3 or 4 different email accounts, such as myself, I could go onto the city website 3 or 4 times, use a different name, and do that. How are you going to be able to verify that the person actually lives in the city, et cetera, et cetera? Are you going to have to do that individually each time, or what would the process be?
Thank you, Councillor Armstrong, through the chair. That's a great question. So unlike email, when it's a scanned or PDF copy of the electoral response form, they're required to fill out their name, address, and signature. So that is the same way as if we received it in person. We would verify their name and address is they're an eligible elector and that they have filled out their name, address, and signature as is required under the community charter.
And how do you do that? Through like BC Hydro or something? Like, as if I have somebody staying at my house?
So how we do that, it's not, it's based on who's an eligible elector, registered
So you
voters
have a
list.
list of that?
Yeah,
Thank
so
you.
we request the provincial voters list because we do not maintain our own voters list. So we get the provincial voters list through every AAP we conduct, and we verify that they are an eligible elector.
And IT is satisfied with that, then
IT
obviously?
is
Thank you.
satisfied with that, yes.
Thank you. Mayor Krog.
Thank you, Chair. I want to thank Ms. Gurry and her staff, her shop for the work. I think it's a very satisfactory improvement to our existing system, and I would be happy to move the recommended motion.
Seconded by Councillor Perino. Any discussion? Councillor Gasselbrock?
Thanks, Chair. I appreciate the work on that. I think that it's a great step forward that we can do electronic submission. And I don't think it just increases the accessibility and everybody can be able to do that from their home and it saves driving back and forth. And so I think that really meets a certain request from the community. And then just in terms of being able to give the community a heads up and make sure that everybody has the proper information before a decision, an AAP decision. I think that the communication strategy policy really meets that requirement, and it'll be up to council, but for larger situations, we can decide to send something out a month beforehand or however long with full details about the particular project, how folks can access having their say. And I think that was another big demand from the community on that. So I appreciate the work on this and happy to support. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Manley.
Thank you, Chair. And likewise, I appreciate the staff work on this. I think it's a very reasonable change to the AAP process. I appreciate the having electronic form submission and a way to track and make sure that it's not abused. I think limiting 10 printed copies at front desk at Legislative Services is completely reasonable. There's lots of photocopiers around town that people can access if they so wish to run off 1,000 copies of the form. And the communication strategy as well. I think communication is super important, that we really make sure that people have a heads up on AAPs coming forward and what it's about and how to get involved. So thank you for that.
Thank you. Councillor Eastmere.
Thank you. I had 2 questions. The first one through you is about how we deal with the 10 forms per person per AAP. Is that tricky for staff to be able to monitor that? Like, how do you deal with that?
Thank you, through the chair, to Councillor Eastmere. Good question. We have already started to look at some methods of tracking that, and but honestly, it probably won't be completely solid. Some people may probably get more than 10 forms, and I don't think that's the end of the world, but we'll do our best to make sure that we're not limiting anyone and educating them as they go, to try to keep track of that and or develop a system that we can track that accordingly.
Sounds good. Yeah, totally agree that it's not the worst thing if people pick up more, come multiple days to pick up 10 forms, but the limit makes sense as far as the staff time to do all of that printing. The second question is about the notification and the communication strategy for an AAP versus a referendum, because my understanding is that they're almost the exact same. Am I right in that?
Thank you, Chair. Through you to Councillor Eastmere. Yes, the notification, the legislative notifications are the same for both processes. The communications and engagement plan we will bring to council before you enter into an AAP to see that the communication engagement plan suffices for you, like that you agree with it going forward, that you've put your stamp of approval on it, and then we'll proceed with the alternative approval process and that communication engagement plan. I can see that same thing happening for a referendum, should we go to a referendum, that when we come to you with that decision, would you like to go to a referendum, AAP, that we would bring a communication engagement plan just based on your direction, even though it's not in policy.
Okay, I appreciate that, because I think there maybe is a perception that with the AAP process, less information gets shared with the public, and there's, it's more of a, just less information gets shared with the public, and that's simply not true. And I know that we will, whether it's an AAP or a referendum, be putting out the same amount of information and the same opportunities for people to get engaged. And as we've talked about so many times, an AAP is actually easier to engage with because you have way more time. So yeah, I'm looking forward to making sure we have a really robust communication strategy for either route.
Thank you, Councillor Eastmere. I see no further speakers. There is a motion on the table. I'll call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? I see none opposed. Thank you. Going over to 6B, Prosperous Nanaimo bills for the future plan. Mr. Lindsay.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I'm going to start, but I'm going to quickly, we have a bit of a PowerPoint to walk through the report today. Maybe if I can just ask for that to be brought up on the screen. While that's coming up, maybe just a couple of points. Certainly excited to be in front of the committee and have this discussion this afternoon and support council and working through this. I don't think there's any surprise. We've been in front of you many times before talking about kind of major projects that I would say have been in a number of strategic plans, been in your official community plans, and many of these we're going to talk to you about today are in your integrated action plan. And as we've talked about in the past, so a lot of these projects are outside the current funding envelopes and will require long-term borrowing in order to fulfill those objectives. So just a little bit talking about, before we get into the PowerPoint, just about the motions that are in front of you, the recommendations. So one is, the first recommendation is that you can see that council, or that the committee recommended council consideration of a referendum in the spring of 2025 for the South End Community Center. Partly, and as noted in the report, I think we've made some significant progress in the pre-planning of that site, including the identification of a preferred location that we'll hopefully be able to share with the community in the very, very near future. But it's really got to the point, Madam Chair, where we think that the next step in this evolution of this process is really to move forward with borrowing, if we want that project to go ahead. And it is the spring of 2025 that we're recommending. The next motion is there's other projects out there that we've talked about to council in the past, and we'll go through some of them today. The walkway being one, improvements at Bevan Park being another, and there are others. I'm sure there may be others that council brings up in that discussion today. And it's really a question about, are there other projects that we believe are at a point where the next step is borrowing? Is there an interest from council to add one or more projects to a potential referendum for the South End Community Center. And then the final is, depending on the above recommendations, and if council at all wants to proceed with any project, the next would be a motion to return back. So we would come back to you in the fall with some updated costing. Some of the projects we're going to talk to you about today, of course, we have cost estimates on. Some of them are a couple years old, some of them older. So it would be important to make sure that we came back so council had that opportunity to understand what the full numbers are based on today's estimates. The other thing I want to make sure that we've tried to make the report a way that you can follow through each project and understand what not only the overall cost of the project is, but if we did borrowing, what would the implications be for the average homeowner in Nanaimo? So there's a number you'll see in the report, and we'll go through that today as we go through each project. I want to be really clear, though, that that number is based on the project being financed 100% from long-term borrowing, and then the debt repayment being done 100% from taxation. Of course, there's other tools and mechanisms and levers that council can use when it comes time to do projects. You do have reserves. We do have the opportunity to go and seek grants, hopefully, on many of these exciting projects. But there are also some new tools that the province has announced, like what were previously development cost charges. We now have amenity cost charges, which actually allow us to start collecting for things like community centers. So we can actually collect from future development that would assist with debt repayment. So all those things could be in the mix. But to keep things simple today, the number you have is 100% from borrowing, 100% from repayment from taxation. And I'm sure Ms. Mercer will touch on that a bit again in the presentation. Finally, whenever we're considering what to move forward on today, I think it's really important. We think it's really important that you have an eye a bit on the horizon. What's coming down the road? What are those projects that we know that are out there, whether it be 5 years, 10 years, 20 years from now, that we know eventually they're going to be significant and will in all likelihood require long-term borrowing. So we have, as you know, a maximum threshold in borrowing. So we need to make sure that we maintain capacity in that envelope so that when it does come time for some of these major infrastructure upgrades that we do not have a choice in, the dam would be an example of that there is capacity there. Again, the list in the projects that are outlined in your report is not an exhaustive list. It's those that we are aware of today as we sit here today. You come back a year, 2 years, 5 years from now, and I'm sure there'll be new things on the list that get added over time. But really, we think it's important to have that, have one eye at least on the future and on that horizon of what do we see coming. So happy to take questions on any of that as we work through. They gave me one slide and they took all the rest. So my one slide is simply, again, just to provide the committee and ultimately council with an overview on these large projects, and then ultimately be back as per the recommendations and seeking your input on what one or more that you may want to consider moving forward with. And unless there are questions for me, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Harding and we'll start right through the presentation.
I don't see any questions for you.
Although we only gave him one slide, he already took most of my notes about the South End Community Center. So the South End Community Center has been something that's been identified since the 2005 Parks, Recreation, Culture Master Plan, identifying that the South End particularly lacking in recreational, cultural, community space. All we really have in the South End. When I say South End, we're looking at things from 10th Street South or that general location. And so it's been identified as a need for many years. The latest update in the city plan also emphasized the fact that, again, that area of the city's lacking in services. So this council, or the one just at the end of the council, directed staff to proceed with a detailed feasibility study, of which we've now completed. And we'll bring more details forward to council and the community in the near future. And one of the reasons we haven't completely open is that we're getting very close, as Mr. Lindsay mentioned, of securing a site. So by the fall, we'll be able to make that announcement and bring out some details. With that, though, in the last 2 years, we're working with a lot of different community groups. We think this can be a true community center in the sense that many different types of community services would be involved in this. It wouldn't just be recreation or cultural. It could provide a variety of other community services, and we can go through some of those if council would like. With the study, we've looked at sizes ranging from 45,000 square feet to 65,000 square feet, and also with an option, if desired, to put housing on top. The next slide, let's do some questions on this first one. Next slide is just a quick example. Of course, whenever you put up a design, we think this is the final design. This definitely is not, but it does give us a general ideas of the types of uses this center could be. We've definitely moved towards a two-story with a facility option versus a one-story. And again, as mentioned, if council desires or the opportunities exist, potentially to add housing on top of it. This concept here shown is again, the aspect of a major 2 gymnasiums, but lots of other community space within it, including working with the culture community on creation of a black box, similar to what the Port Theatre's been wanting to do for many years, of a small rehearsal space. There's options with this kind of community center to provide some other cultural venues that could then be multiple use for a variety of other activities. In this model, we've talked with the Regional Library. We've worked with Vancouver Island Health on a number of health options. We definitely want to make sure that there's a daycare included in this facility regardless, given the general location where we want it to be. There's a real lacking in childcare provisions. And as we go through the details, Mr. Lindsay mentioned, if council proceeds us to go to whatever type of borrowing options you want, we would flesh out all those details in the coming months of what this facility could look like. Chair, I could go on, but I'll stop there.
Any questions for Mr. Harding about the South End Community Center? Councillor Eastmere.
At what point do we talk more about the housing on top? Like because I feel like that will really inform our decision about funding, et cetera.
Your Chair, to Councillor Eastmere, we've heard pretty loud and clear from just about everybody that want us to consider that. So if we proceed, we would bring forward some building options that would include what it would look like with some housing on top and some options what that configuration could be.
Okay, and just a second question about the way that we proceed with potentially getting voter permission to borrow the money. Do we have to do a referendum on this, or could we choose to go the AAP route? Because you said it's been an identified need for a long time. This to me speaks to a project that we should be using the AAP process for.
Yes, Chair, Councillor Eastmere, the report mentions, again, you have those options. Other communities, the Kelowna has just, for example, gone through for recreation cultural facilities an AAP process. Substantial borrowing, I think it's $250 million for theirs, and others have done that. Others have gone, though, for referendum focus, so it's, or method. It's really a council decision which way you'd like to proceed. I would also mention, just one use I didn't want to highlight is most of our recreation cultural venues are also our reception areas for emergencies. We don't have one in the South End. This would be also built as a reception area. It's been identified through our feasibility, again, as something of a need in that area.
Mr. Lindsay?
Madam Chair, I just want to confirm too on the housing aspect. Certainly a lot to figure out as we go forward, but certainly in my mind at least, if we did go forward with housing, would really be with the idea that there would be some kind of partnership, whether it's through BC Housing or through the Ministry of Housing, the BC Builds program, maybe some other program that's as yet announced from the province, but the idea would be that we bring partners to the table. So it wouldn't be doing that would require extra borrowing from the city. If anything, there may be cost savings. We don't know. There could be cost savings in the foundation, for example, but the idea is that there'd be other partners who would bring money to the table. It wouldn't be a larger borrowing ask. Just want to make sure it was clear.
Thank you for that clarity. I still have a list of questions. Councillor Gesselbrock?
Thanks. I think Mr. Lindsay addressed this in part just around the cost if we decide to put housing on. I definitely have the opinion now that if we're building anything, we should be trying to put housing on top of it, just building up. But it could potentially be at a cost saving, depending on the partnership and the type of housing. I guess like the more supportive or non-market housing there'd be some cost involved with that, maybe picked up by BC Housing. But if it was like, partnering with a developer for just market, that could potentially reduce costs or just not add more to the project.
I think
That's
what I was trying to say.
Yeah, just clarifying.
I think there's opportunities there where it wouldn't necessarily be the city shouldering those costs, but that's correct.
I guess the question is like, there's not a way to cut it where you could actually save money by putting housing on top. It's more just sort of an additional community benefit that, you know, most likely will be somewhat cost neutral. It's not sort of a way to save money.
I think if you're going into it, the primary objective would be to create housing.
Yeah.
I think we may, depending on who the partner is, what programs are available at the time, in theory, you should be able to provide some savings, but the scale or order of magnitude of that, I think it's probably premature to give you any sense right now.
Gotcha.
Mr. Harding, go ahead.
Yeah, and just on overall partnerships, as I probably went over that pretty quickly, the variety of square footage of the community center itself, housing aside, is with the idea of many other partners involved. That could be contributions up front to the cost, or could be contributions long-term, either through lease or license of use of the facility. So we go through some of the detailed costs with some of the other groups, be it the daycare or VHA or other partners that would also be coming to the table either at the front of the project or, you know, long-term use of the facility.
Thank you. Mayor Krog?
Thank you very much, Chair. And my question, Mr. Harding, Mr. Lindsay, I'm not as excited about the prospect of trying to put housing on this site, given its, you know, the potential limited size of it. And what we have in front of us is the two-level option. And one of the things I'm interested in, whether or not it's been considered, is in the construction of it, whether it's a one-level or a two-level, to allow for a third level to be added on top, and or if it's a 1.5 level option, which is what we have in front of us, to, in other words, fill in that space at some point. In other words, construct it with that in mind over time, as opposed to having to consider purchasing another site, putting up another facility, et cetera. In other words, expanding what you already have built on. Much like pioneers used to add bedrooms as the family expanded, but didn't foreclose that opportunity by the way they designed the structure in the first place.
Is that a question?
Has it been considered?
Yes.
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 Sorry, it was buried in all my verbiage, I know.
Maybe
I think we'd have to, Your Worship, or the Chair through the Worship, I think we have to come back to you with what those would look like, with either be air parcel, like securing the building that we could add on to later on based on how the pre-construction was done. If that answers your question, but we could come back and show what could be added on at different times, if that helps. I would say also this part of the costing of this right now is with some underground parking included, given the site location that we're thinking of. So some of the costs, increased costs, is also showing that we have some underground parking.
Thank you. Councilor Perino?
Thank you, Chair. Question through you to Mr. Harding. Mr. Harding, could you, and I apologize if I missed it during your discussion, can you talk a little bit about the gymnasiums? What kinds of sports would be there? You know, are we talking basketball? Are we talking tennis? Are we talking pickleball? Are we talking what sport? Like what kinds of things could the community expect?
Yeah, thank you, Chair, through the Council Perino. The gymnasiums would be very similar to Oliver Woods gymnasiums,
Okay.
which are, we've got every kind of sporting activity you can think of, and other activities in there as well. So, you know, basketball, pickleball, badminton,
Everything.
Floor hockey, all the different types of uses.
Okay.
What we'd like to do with this, working though with the cultural community though, is also find some ways to ensure that we have some cultural opportunities there with either some seating or pull-out apparatus that we can convert, either within the gymnasium with a black box type of performance area or a separated black box for some performance, because we definitely know through our work that we're also lacking those performance spaces and rehearsal spaces for cultural venues.
Okay.
So that would be the difference with Oliver Woods. It gives me a different perspective. Oliver Woods, which is, I'd also mention, even though it's built in the north end or some of the north end, it's a regional facility. We have people from
All over.
in Parksville to Ladysmith utilizes. This is also, even though it's in the south end, it will be a regional facility, as most of our facilities are.
Okay.
People travel from all over to use it, just because sometimes there'll be some niche sports or organizations that are inside.
What
So
is-
the gymnasiums are definitely multi-purpose.
Okay,
We have the two together that we can close them off, have separate uses, open them up for larger uses.
Great. Stage?
That's what I was getting at with the cultural side of things in the black box, how we can design it in such a way that it can be utilized in that,
Excellent.
that kind of form.
Excellent, great, thank you so much.
Thank you. Counselor Manley?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I think it's an interesting concept, and I like the black box concept as well, like creating multi-use spaces for different folks and different organizations in town. I'm interested in the housing option. I'm curious about whether selling airspace to a developer would be something that a developer might be interested in, or are we just thinking about partnering with provincial government on something like that? This is an area that we want to densify, but it's also kind of enclosed by a couple of highways and a railway, and if we are going to make it a, you know, it's the community plan is to have it as a neighborhood center, then housing's going to be important there as well for merchants, et cetera.
I think both, through the chair, I think both those options obviously would be on the table for council. I think we've definitely seen some investment in that community now with some new purpose-built market rental buildings. If I stood back and look at all of council's objectives, and an increasing amount of affordable housing remains a priority for us. We know we need like 50% of our units, so if we could find a provincial program, possibly through BC Housing or other partnerships that allowed for affordable housing to be brought to the community, I think that would be a win-win. But absolutely, a partnership with a private developer would provide housing but offset more of the cost. So just a bit of a what are the priorities? What are the goals and objectives we're trying to meet?
Yeah, we definitely need housing for low-income workers and for families and in different parts of the community, and I think that would be a good asset in this part of the community for sure. So don't want to close that option off in our thinking as we go forward. Thanks.
Thank you. Counselor Armstrong?
Thank you. You said that this would also be used as, you know, our emergency, for the south end, emergency, whatever. So if that's the case and this gets the approval to go ahead, will we make sure that emergency management's at the table so that we can actually build in stuff that they're needed? Because I know, having been through different emergencies at different sites, they're not really geared the way they should be. So we'd be able to have, I know we have the emergency operations center, but sometimes there's not the linkages between them that should be there.
Chair, yes, we've already started those conversations through the feasibility side of things.
Secondary on that, if we would be looking at that as an emergency management center, do you know if there's any funding available through any of the grants that are now coming forward from the federal infrastructure grant or whatever, because it is going to be an emergency center, and I know that there has been some talk about that.
The chair, Council Officer, I'm not aware of that, but that's something as we proceed with this as a project of council, I think we'll start unturning every stone that there is on different types of partnerships, funding options that we could. Ms. Mercer may have some answer, but I don't know.
No, it's okay, that's fine.
Yeah.
And secondly, and I'm surprised I'm saying this, but I do agree that I think that would be a good site for affordable housing for families or seniors, because with the daycare on site, and especially low-income workers, I think it would be great. Thanks.
Thank you. Mr. Harding, that's my list of speakers. We can carry on. Thank you. Oh, it's Ms. Mercer. Thank you.
Thank you. Oh, did I go the wrong way? There we go. Am I on? Okay. So the Waterfront Walkway is our next project. So this project has been talked about for many years and has been included in 3 council strategic plans. As well, it's identified as a priority in the current city plan. So 2017 saw the completion of the Waterfront Walkway Implementation Plan developed, and this looked at how a continuous walkway could be implemented from Departure Bay all the way to the Nanaimo River estuary. So through that work, sections that were a priority for the community were identified, and the section between Departure Bay and downtown came out as a top priority. So in 2019, more work was done on the section between Departure Bay and the BC Ferry Terminal, and that work recommended a Green Shores approach, which would allow for a separate cycling lane and a pedestrian area and a whole new beach project with public access to the water. So a lot of background work was done for this project as well to date, and that included a sea level rise study and coastal erosion and geotechnical work, as well as staff have reached out and worked with permitting agencies to get a good understanding of what the Department of Fisheries and Oceans required, as well as what the provincial government required in order to lease to the city. So there has been extensive public engagement with this project as well, and overall, the feedback has been positive. So back in 2022, the departure bay to BC Ferry Terminal section was costed at $30 to $38 million. Given the cost escalation the city has experienced in recent years, the cost is now expected to be in excess of $40 million. So staff are recommending updating the costing to reflect current construction values and return to a future meeting to present the updated information for council's consideration. So that's where we're at with that project.
Any questions for Ms. Mercer about the waterfront walkway? I don't see any.
Yeah. So this is a rendering of what the walkway could look like along the departure bay section. And I'll hand it back to Mr. Harding.
I just had a quick question.
Oh, sorry, Councillor Manley.
I'm just wondering how discussion with Department of Fisheries and Stenamo and others have gone with this. I know that doing something like this would require a lot of checks on boxes for making this go forward. How are those kind of negotiations coming along?
Through the chair to Councillor Manley, some of those conversations are ongoing, and we still have several things to check off the list before the project can be fully moved forward.
But generally positive feedback?
Yeah, and there is just some decisions that eventually council will have to decide on how they want to approach certain things, and that will indicate further discussion with each of the federal and provincial governments.
Thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Armstrong.
Don't know if this is the time, but for me, this project's off my list because I just looked at what our needs are, which came to 575 million, what our wants are, which, not even wants, these are next to needs for me, 175 million, and to me, this is a nice to have, not a necessity. So, and then I think the other thing we have to remember when we're looking at these projects, we have to take a look at the increases at the RDN as well, which hits our taxpayers, especially when we're looking at almost probably 800 million just for a hospital build. Thank you.
Thank you. That's my speakers list. Mr. Harding.
Thank you, Chair. Move forward here. So taking this advantage, if council members, we're hoping to come back in the fall and give you an update on the Bevan Park Master Plan, when it was adopted and all the different types of amenities that's been identified through the master plan and then reconfirmed through city plan. So with this major projects, we come forward to council to remind of a variety of demands or requests over the years for updates and renewals for Bevan Park. Bevan Park, as you all know, is central to the city. A number of the facilities are aging, but in particular, there's also lots of opportunity for new builds as per the master plan. So I wanted to bring this forward for discussion now and any questions you have, because this may be something a council may want to bundle, depending on whatever borrowing options you go for, say, the South End Community Center. You may want to bundle it with some amenities that would also go into Bevan Park. And there's a long list, and we can go through some of those. But potentially, there's with the what we call the older agricultural area, the options of putting in some more larger, newer, multi-purpose buildings that could be used for a variety of functions, from the weekly farmers market to weekly other events, from dog agility to all the different types of things you could see in a major recreation facility like that. As well as the community has been wanting a true field house for a number of years, where the sports could go inside and have a facility large enough, be it for soccer, football, field lacrosse, baseball, softball. As soon as I start listing it, I'm going to miss somebody. All the different important sports that we have in the community. And then there's a variety of other single uses that's been identified over the years. Gymnastics would love to get back into on our property somehow. We're working with them on opportunities. Add some other types of councils heard about racket sports and the desire for that. In addition to those newer type of buildings, there is the older building, which is built in the mid-70s. The pool, the Frank Crane Social Center. There's the detailed plans of how to enhance those, particularly the pool, where you could bring the gymnasium finally down onto the main floor much more accessible and expand it. The pool itself has opportunities for expansion for therapeutic type of pools, or expanding for teaching and use, expand the life there, as well as it close in what we call the breezeways, connect all three facilities together. It's been a long-term goal plan where there's other uses inside, walking track, just a better flow of how to serve the community. And again, Bevan being so central, there's lots of opportunities there. I can go on and on about Bevan. I guess I should move the slide forward. So there's the older building was being built in the 70s, existing kind of area. Now with the other ones added onto it. And then we've definitely been able to add some facilities in the last number of years with the turf fields, Stevie Smith Bike Park, the BMX park that we're doing right now, and then some others, but realistically we haven't put a lot into it in the last number of years. And there's just some general ideas of what you could see of some multi-purpose type of buildings. And it could be a variety of types. The bottom left is an air dome, the top right is not, it's a different type. You can see the farmer's market type of multi-purpose building that could be a market one in the evening, and then could be other uses during the day and other weekends. So spaces that are multi-purpose, but also enough single purpose so that they suit whatever those uses are. And these, again, just some quick examples of things that we could come back to council with some specific projects.
Thank you, Mr. Harding. Councillor Armstrong.
Through you to Ms. Mercer. When I'm looking at the financial considerations, we're looking at the improvement of heating, ventilation, et cetera. Would that be something that could come from our asset management fund? Because to me, that would be the purpose of that fund versus bundling that into capital project and borrowing.
Through the chair to Councillor Armstrong, things like that would be looked at when we go to fund the project. So it depending on if it was new, we couldn't use asset management, but if it was renovating or improving existing, that could be a funding source for the project.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm just concerned about like all this stuff and the additions that cost taxpayers. Thank you.
Councillor Gesselbrock.
Thanks, Chair. Sort of a really broad question, and probably to folks that have been around for a long time, but just in terms of what it costs for a particular amenity now, say compared to 20, 30 years ago, do you get more for your money back then than you do now? Or is it like relative out, like back then it didn't seem like you had to borrow as much money and things were more affordable in terms of building a building and staffing in that?
Through the chair, I'll take a kick at that one. I think it's similar to some of the articles you see about my salary in 1975 was this, and the cost of a house was that, compared to my salaries is today, and the cost of the house is 5 or 6 times. It's very similar in the construction of facilities. We've seen we'll call it a disproportionate increase in the cost of facilities versus the cost of living, or versus the municipality's revenue, I would say. So yes, back in the good old days, we got more bang for buck than we certainly do now. There's an element of, I think, everything expenses is expensive when you start to talk millions of dollars. It's always challenging and overwhelming to absorb it as an individual. When this particular structure was built, it sounded very, very expensive. Now it looks pretty economical.
Great. So just to build on that, some economic situations are cyclical, and then others is just like the world is changing. There's less resources, the demographic distribution is a bit different, what we're producing and how we're producing is changing. And if really things aren't going to get much cheaper ever again, and I think some analysis around this needs to get, but it's just the way that things are going. I think really looking at multifunctionality of spaces, looking at sort of like, if we're diversifying in a whole bunch of different types of uses and specific specialized sports and having to build, this, moving away from that, and that too, the degree of maintenance in spaces, like maybe just building big buildings that take a lot of maintenance, and that just we need to like start moving away from, and you know there needs a cultural shift. I was just looking at the cost of these buildings, and that is like wow, and it's a lot, and there's a lot of like needs and wants to do stuff. And should we be focusing more on sort of like outdoor spaces, and maybe we have to take into account our weather and that type of thing, but what are the more affordable? And it's just sort of general thoughts that I've need to think through and work through in terms of where we're going to put our capital. But yeah, stuff's extremely expensive, and yeah, thank you.
Councillor Manley?
Thank you. Yeah, I have a lot of thoughts about that monopolization of supply chains and really gouging, you know, in terms of the increased costs of materials. I'm curious about the Bevan Master Plan, and then in relation to the South End Community Center. I know there's a lot of demand for space from users and user groups. And would the South End Community Center relieve some of that pressure to expand services and facilities at the Bevan Park complex?
Chair, Council Manager, so I understand, so does the South End Community Center will definitely take some latent demand. I would say though, if we had, I've always said for a number of years, if we had 3 Oliver Woods gymnasiums, we'd have them booked every night.
Right.
So we're over 100,000 now city population, and we serve a pretty large region. Nanaimo has a regional function, but particularly in lots of services, but particularly in the recreation and cultural services, we're of a regional nature. So it'll take that demand up and fill it up. And where we've been, the only analogy I can give you is by us moving to artificial turf for the last number of years, we've been able to centralize some of our sports into those areas, and then take some pressure off of some other areas. So whenever you add something like Oliver Woods or a South End Community Center, you definitely be able to disperse it and take some pressure away. But we are a growing city with a lot of growing desires. So.
Yeah, we have an estimated population growth of about another 50% in the next 25 years is the figures I've seen based on the trajectory we're on. So that demand is only going to increase, and it's, you know, key part of quality of life is parks, recreation, places that people can enjoy the quality of life in our communities. So thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Armstrong.
Through you to Mr. Sims. I was reading an article that the majority of people that build to LEED standards are just municipalities, whatever. Does that add significantly to the cost when we build to a LEED standard versus not?
Through the chair, I think I'm going to put a little plug in for the facilities group here, and just note that Council does have a current policy to build to LEED Gold, and that's sort of a standing Council policy, but the intent is in the fall to bring back a revised policy around green buildings specific to Nanaimo, I guess specific to needs, and I love the term fit for purpose. So when you, the problem with, you know, any of the certification programs that are out there is that you tend to chase points to try, you know, my favorite example is putting low VOC carpet in a room you would have just left concrete flooring, because you get a point for putting in low VOC carpet.
Right.
So a policy around that makes more sense, that's focused on, the general trend in the industry is going more to carbon sensitivity as opposed to the energy points and those sorts of challenging systems. I'm long-winded answer, I apologize, but chasing the certification has a cost in itself, and often we've found that with other communities as well, that chasing those certifications and those special systems often impacts the operation down the road to the point where those systems get shut off. So hence the sort of, I would say, a smarter fit for purpose
So when you bring that report forward, will it show the difference? Because I can't quite remember, I should have printed it, but they said it almost added 20% onto the cost of a building to search for those standards. So if you're talking 100 million, and 20% of that, that's a lot of money.
I think the other, maybe the counterpoint to that would be, Chair, that there's a reduction, if it's done well, if we'll call it a green building policy is done well, then there's a reduction in operational costs. So when we're talking upfront costs for any facility, the capital cost is just one component, and the ongoing life cycle operational cost is another. So anything you can do upfront to reduce that is also better.
This is why I like cost-benefit analysis is included in our reports. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't have any other speakers. Mr. Harding, you can, or I believe it's Mr. Sims. Oh, I cut you off. I apologize. I didn't do it on purpose, I swear. It's not actually showing up. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Chair. Very kind of you to give me a minute or two to say something. In light of all the rumblings and ramblings around economic future and the cost of construction, et cetera, I'd remind everyone, as I have before, what John Kenneth Galbraith said. The whole purpose of economic prognostication was to make astrology look respectable. I can remember 40 years ago, you know, having spent a year in our happy home, which was worth half exactly of what it was valued at 3 years before that, and it continued to decline in value. There seems to be this sense of incredible optimism that real estate prices will never go down, construction costs will never reduce, et cetera, et cetera. The reality is, 100+ years ago, Argentina was one of the world's leading middle-class countries. Electric lights and telephones and tram cars and automobiles and people prospering, et cetera, et cetera. And where is Argentina today? I guess what I'm saying is the fear about potential costs is something to consider, but we should not be the overriding factor when one looks at things that are both necessary and, with respect to Councillor Armstrong's remarks about the waterfront walkway, nice to haves. The nice to haves include the acquisition of parkland and, for instance, Stanley Park in the city of Vancouver, public amenities, you know, a magnificent courthouse in Vancouver that eventually became a fabulous art gallery. You have to step back and also consider that basically the cost of borrowing is a generational cost. It's basically 20, 25 years. And what kind of legacy do you want to leave for the citizens? And if we're putting it to referendum, it'll be their decision in any event. But I think we should be bold, and as we consider this list today, and it's not over yet, obviously, the presentation, and I'm very appreciative of staff's work on this, think about what kind of city you want to see here in 20 or 25 or 30 years. And don't be too timid, either on the basis that we won't be able to afford it, or it'll be too expensive, or alternatively that it might be ridiculously cheap and we'll all be kicking ourselves that we hadn't undertaken these projects before. And also, if we have a long list of solid capital projects that have been approved within a reasonable period of time, it may be our duty and our job, if the economy turns down, to in fact take advantage of that and provide employment for our citizens who will happily construct all of these facilities. You know, governments historically build, and capital expenditure is the best return on the dollar in terms of employment and benefit to the economy, historically build when things go down, and that's where we may be headed. I'm not going to dwell on what's happening in the United States, but we may see some dramatic changes in the economy. So I'm just saying, let's not be too timid, let's not be foolish, but let's not be too timid, because so far I haven't seen anything on this list, and we've got the report in front of us, and the folks looked at it probably wouldn't say, you know what, we're going to need it. Police station, operations center, improvements to Bevan, existing facilities. So anyways, I'm sorry for dribbling on, Chair. Kind of you again to let me say a few words. Thank you.
You're so welcome. We're about a third of the way through the staff report, so maybe I could just ask councillors to keep their questions specific to what is being presented on the slides, and then we'll have general conversation at the end of the staff presentation. Thank you.
Thanks, Chair. I don't need to speak too much to the Public Works Yard and the Operations Center project. It's been, you know, was the subject of your meeting, the GPC, a few weeks ago. Just to note that staff have been working on this idea of the, I believe Councillor Eastmere coined it, one and done. And it's a, you're not taking credit for that. It's a matter of, you know, the original master plan had the whole thing laid out, and you know, in the context of all of these other projects, perhaps, you know, building the fleet maintenance and the public admin building, the two highest priorities in one shot, is something to consider. And given that the recommendation from that GPC through council will be considered on next Monday, Ms. Full has been working on a financing or a funding options package for council to consider as well. So that's based on that original, that motion from the 24th of June GPC. So that will be in front of you next week as well. Any questions on that? I'm happy to answer, but we can move on.
I don't see any, Mr. Sims.
So on to the RCMP detachment expansion. So the city has been working with the RCMP over the last several years to help address their spacing needs. So the building they are currently in was built in 1986 and is around 42,000 square feet. So based on current staffing levels, a building of around 70,000 square feet is needed. So when population growth and staffing levels are projected out to 2046, the building requirement is around the 100,000 square foot range. So options were needed to address these space constraints, and the project was broken out into two phases. So phase one was to deal with the immediate spacing needs in the current building. So the time frame that was assigned to this work was from 2023 to 2027, and a budget of approximately $3.3 million was attached. So renovations to 580 Fitzwilliam Street, which is the former fire admin building, has been completed, and staff will be relocating to this site shortly. And renovations to the detachment at 303 Prideaux Street were included in this budget as well. And the scope of work for these renos has been defined and will be scheduled shortly. So these two changes will buy the city some time to implement a long-term solution. So phase two is planning for future expansion. So other site locations were looked at, but after all things were considered, the current location at 303 Prideaux Street was found to be the best location. So a budget of $2 million was allocated for detailed design. And staff went away and worked on some options, and a solution was developed for a new detachment to be located adjacent to the current building, and the cost for this was in the range of $270 million. So, however, given the magnitude of that cost estimate, council has asked staff to go back and re-examine other options, and that work is currently underway. So once the work is complete, staff will return to a future council meeting with all of the updated information for your consideration. And the work, just as a note, the budget for this re-examination or review has been taken from the $2 million budget that was assigned to the detailed design. And this is just a rendering of what the new RCMP detachment could look like based on that initial work that was done.
You're not showing up, but I see you. Go ahead, Councillor Armstrong.
Thank you. So if this goes forward again, not like the old building, is there going to be the option to build up as more stuff is needed so we don't have to go out and look at buying land and stuff again? Because I know the original plan, they didn't build it so you could go up.
Through the chair to you, Councillor Armstrong, all of those, there will be many different things being looked at, and we'll bring back different options at that time.
That's just my concern, because we know it's only going to grow, excuse me, as the city grows. So instead of like having to, try and buy properties or expropriate whatever, it'd be sure nice if we had a plan where we could go up instead of having to go out. Thank you.
The idea was to build the building with expansion space in it.
Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you. Just want to let IT know that the mics aren't coming up on my display anymore. So flag me down if you have questions. I don't see any, Ms. Mercer, so back to you.
Okay, thank you. So there is a variety of existing assets that the city has that will be in need of substantial investment in the coming years. And the 20-year investment plan or asset management update that was presented to council in 2023 identified a growing funding gap, and especially when it came to facilities. As well, there are always projects that pop up for inclusion into the project plan. And some of those projects are listed here on the slide. So things like this building here is coming up to 20 years old, and components of that will need to be replaced or upgraded. More work at the stadium district. So there's always going to be a plethora of projects that are vying for funding consideration. And so we have to kind of think about those when we're trying to plan out a 10 to 20 year project plan. Oops. Wrong way. So this is a graphical view of the potential project timeline for all of the projects that have been identified. And the upcoming funding slides are built off of this timeline. So this slide attempts to illustrate the potential property tax impact of each borrowing on a typical house with a value of $783,808 if all borrowing was undertaken in the planned timeline. So each of the projects are listed here with their estimated borrowing cost and the tax impact. So these are rough estimates to give you an idea of what the cost impact could be for each project, as there are many assumptions that have gone into these calculations. So one, it assumes that all of the projects will be funded through long-term borrowing, and all debt repayment would be funded solely from taxation. And as Mr. Lindsay said earlier, staff will continue to look for grant and partnership opportunities, as well as allocations from eligible reserves to reduce the amount of borrowing needed or to help fund debt repayment. So the city has 5 years from the date of the borrowing bylaw adoption to access the debt funds. So the city would draw upon borrowing over those 5 years based on cash flow needs. And as we have mentioned in previous presentations, if the project came in under budget, the city would only borrow the amount that was needed for that project. So full borrowing wouldn't be used, but in the case of this slide, we've assumed that full borrowing is needed. And some components of a project cannot be funded through borrowing, so such as public art, and we would have to find other sources for those. It assumes that the borrowing period is 20 years, and that's historically what the city's term on borrowing has been, so we've kept consistent with that. We've assumed that long-term debt interest is 4.58%, as that was the MFA indicative rate, lending rate when the chart was created. As interest rates continue to fluctuate, the rate will likely be different by the time we actually went to borrow. And the way MFA borrowing works, it's spread over 20 years, and interest rates will vary during that time. So generally, the first 10 years are set at an interest rate, and then there's 2 5-year renewal terms. So at year 10, you renew, in year 15. That's generally how it works. So there could be a couple of different interest rates in there, depending on how the market goes. The amount of borrowings are estimates only. So before any electoral approval is sought, more work will need to be done to refine the cost estimates on most of these projects. And lastly, the cost is based on 1% of taxes in 2024 dollars. So the estimated tax amounts reflect costs once full borrowing has been accessed. So as the city doesn't borrow the full amount in the first year, there will be incremental increases up to 5 years before that full cost is shown on a tax notice. So these costs are the full cost once all of that borrowing has been taken. Lots of numbers, lots of assumptions. So this table shows the annual debt servicing cost over the next 10 years. So as you know, under legislation, the city cannot borrow beyond its allowable limits. And based on the city's 2023 financial statements, the annual debt servicing limit is $61.8 million. So that means that the city can have $61.8 million in annual principal and interest payments. So currently, the city sits at 12.3% of that total borrowing limit. So it is important to note that the city's annual debt servicing limit will be updated annually, and it's based on a calculation of 25% of specific municipal revenues. So as those revenues increase over time, so will the city's debt servicing limit. So in 2034, if all of the projects were undertaken as laid out here, and funded solely from borrowing, the estimated debt servicing costs would increase by about $60 million. So when...
Ms. Mercer?
Yep.
Councilor Perino has a question, and then confirm you said 60, yes.
Thank you, Chair. And a question through you to Ms. Mercer. The only thing that's missing for me is the, and it was a graph that you had before, which was what projects are coming to their 20-year term, so they'll be paid off. Mm-hmm. So for me, the only thing that I'm missing from this is does this graph take that into account, I guess is my point.
Yes, through the chair. So this is just strictly new debt.
Yes.
There is a slide coming up that takes what the existing debt is and what the projected new is, and it shows it as it goes up and down over the years. So that's coming.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Thank you. And Mayor Krog. Go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. And it's a rough calculation because I did it in my head. My read is that if we undertook every project at that estimated cost, it would be an increase the average home of $1,148 a year in taxation. Am I roughly accurate?
That is correct, through the chair. It is to note, though, that not all of those would be at the same time, but yes, if you added them up.
Thank you. Save me making that comment for the record, because I would want anyone who's listening to understand that.
Yeah.
If it was instantly everything was built tomorrow and we borrowed all the money and that maximum debt level was there, then it would be $1,148 for all of those projects.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Mercer? Oh, I'm sorry, Councilor Armstrong.
So while you're on this, do you think, and your thoughts as a financial person, should we start to look at, we have the 1% for asset managed, should we start to be budgeting 1% for capital projects per year? Would that be more beneficial than what we're doing now and help eliminate some of the borrowing costs?
Through the chair, the answer to that is we could always use more money for asset management projects. It is one way to allocate money for projects. That is something council could consider for sure.
I'll take it offline and discuss it later with her to see if I want to look at it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. So this table shows the estimated impact on to property tax increase in the approved 2024 to 2028 financial plan. So borrowing will obviously extend beyond the current 5-year financial plan and will have tax impact increases beyond 2028, but this is the information we currently have. So it also should be noted that the values do not include any impact on operating budgets. So for example, the South End Community Center would have some operating costs attached with it. We don't know what that would be today. So that information isn't included in these numbers. This is just the cost of borrowing to build facilities. So there would be no impact in 2024, as the debt isn't expected to be undertaken till 2025. And for 2025, there's not a big impact, as the borrowing would take place at the end of the year. And only the Nanaimo Operations Center is anticipated to start in 2025. So that is why you don't see much of a change in 24 or 25. Actually, you don't see any change. And then as more borrowings start to come on in 2026, 27, and 28, you start to see a bigger impact there. So for Councillor Perino, this is the graph that you would be looking for. And it illustrates what the outstanding balance would be over the next 20 years if the city undertook all of the projects identified on the previous slide. So this slide includes both existing debt and proposed new debt for all of those projects that were identified. So things like the Vancouver Island Conference Center ends in 2026 and 2027, the debt for those. So in those years, the debt would go down, and as we took on more debt for other things. So the peak of the borrowing is in 2031 with an estimated outstanding balance of $663.8 million. So this graph illustrates the projected annual debt servicing costs over the next 20 years if the city went ahead with all of those projects. So as I mentioned in the previous slide, the city's annual debt servicing cost is currently $61.8 million, and that's represented by the flat green or orange line at the top of the chart. Projected debt payments peak in 2033 here at $62 million. So again, that's overcapacity of what our current debt servicing limit is, but as I've said, over time, that debt servicing limit will increase as the city's revenues increase. Having said that, the staff would not recommend getting too close to that line, as it doesn't allow you to be flexible to react to emergencies or other important projects that may come up.
Ms. Mercer, if I may, I want to reiterate that. So this orange line indicates when we're at our max.
Yep.
So for 2031 through 2033, we effectively could not borrow for any projects that came up emergently. And I'm hearing you say that staff do not recommend getting that close to the line, but doing all the projects at once gets us that close to the line for those 3 years.
That is correct. Based on the information that we have today, that is what we anticipate that borrowing to look like.
And of course, we know that we could fund through means other than taxation for some. Like, we know that these are the highest of the high.
If you borrowed everything and pay, if we didn't have any other sources of funding and you had to use strictly borrowing, that's what it would look like.
Thank you. Mr. Lindsay?
And just, I think the elephant in the room, when you look at that graph, is the RCMP building. I just wanted to make a note of that, and probably Ms. Mercer's going to mention it anyways, but that $270 million certainly jumps out, so the corresponding borrowing jumps out. Council has asked us to go away, come back, and look at other options. I'm confident that we can bring forward other opportunities that are more affordable and supportable by the community than that large number, which really skews this chart.
Right. Thank you. Councillor Manley and then Councillor Armstrong.
Thank you, Chair. So just a couple of things. That $61 million figure is actually going to increase as our budget increases, correct?
That's correct.
So it's a moving line. What I don't see in here that was in the report was the South Forks Dam that we're going to see. Is that's 15 years out, 20 years out? How far out are we from that?
Go ahead. 11.
Through the chair, it's estimated about 2061 is the need, so we'd probably want to start building in advance of that. But the reason it's in the report is essentially, if we've got this 20-year horizon and other projects, eventually that's going to come into play, and we just don't want the the declining curve and the rising curve of borrowing for that project to intersect, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So that's a big lump that's coming down the road at us shortly.
And is that something that we're setting money aside for in our asset management plans?
So the asset management plan includes some of the work of the old dam, And as far as the new dam, we've got a DCC starting to set aside some of the funding for that. Some of that is also contributions from the water fund towards that dam as well.
And are those kind of projects eligible for funding from senior levels of government, or no?
Only one on the East Coast have I ever seen augmented water supply be funded from federal grants, but no, I would say not. Anything usually associated with growth would not receive senior government funding.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Armstrong.
Just going back to Mr. Lindsay's comment about the RCP, is there any federal contributions or provincial contributions? I see that Surrey just got $250 million for how many years to help support their transition, so I think we should be asking for some dollars to help increase our capacity.
Through the chair, yes, that would be, there is discussion about what that portion would be.
So that number for us borrowing could drop considerably if the feds and province come to the table?
Depending on how much they came to the table with.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Perino.
Thank you, Chair, and a question through you to Ms. Mercer. On the slide with the projected property tax impact, so that's just a couple back, right there. This is if we were to do all the projects, this is the projected property tax increase that would be required, but this does not necessarily show what the actual property tax would be because there are operational costs and so forth. Is that right? Yep. Okay, so for me, the two things that are missing, and you said it earlier, and I thought that was a really important point when you're looking at the building costs, but not the operational costs. As we build these extra facilities, there's obviously a staffing, right, which is a huge cost. Having said that, you do not take into account, thank goodness, population growth. So as Councillor Manley said, we expect the population to increase by 50% within the next 25 years. If it was that would be a significant help to get us in a better position. Would that be a correct thing to say? I'm not trying to minimize the,
yep,
you know.
Through the chair. So we do budget for growth in revenue from taxation each year. So yes, that could, and the amount of money would be spread over more people, therefore the cost would be reduced, those kind of things. So
yes.
There are different ways to look at that.
Okay. It's just with the property tax impact, without it even including increases, is a bit alarming. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Manley.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chair. Question through you to Mr. Sims. I saw a posting about the actual cost of when we have property or population increases and we have development to match that. There is a cost associated with that. What is it like? It's a large chunk of money for in terms of building out the infrastructure we need for that population growth as well, right?
Through the chair, I think there's a couple of points, and Ms. Mercer referenced the amount that was coming in for growth as a result of, or that we budget for growth. As a result of new development, our taxes go up, or revenue, I should say, goes up $1 million to $1.5 million, or maybe a bit more every year, which the amount of growth in the $400 million a year range doesn't seem to contribute a lot towards property taxes. And I think this is one of the challenges. The reference I think that you're getting at is what FCM has been talking about really is the funding model to fund the services that, as examples have been listed here in the presentation. Property taxes can't possibly keep up with the demand that our residents are putting on us, that the province is, handing off to us. We do an awful lot more service provision than municipalities were originally, envisioned to do. Like Mr. Lindsay said the other day, cities are supposed to do water and sewer and garbage and fire. And now we're funding, warming shelters and, dealing with climate change and a long, long, long list. But the cost per dwelling unit seems to be average across Canada is about $100,000 per dwelling unit, just a little over. For a new house or a new multifamily is about $100,000 in cost. Now, that cost isn't necessarily borne by the municipality. That's often borne by the developer that contributes the cost. But at the same time, when it comes around, and many municipalities in Canada are seeing this now, is that when it comes around to replacing the utilities, replacing the roads, and expanding, the money it's not as readily available. So I'm not sure if that answers your question, but some
Yeah, it does.
some
It
thoughts.
does. I saw that figure, and also as we go through a process where we're densifying, we're actually increasing. We need to increase the capacity of the infrastructure that we rely on, our water, sewer, storm sewers, things like that. It's a bit different than doing greenfield construction in areas where the developer would be covering all of those kind of costs in a new subdivision as opposed to a new building here, a new building there, and the actual impact that has on the infrastructure overall.
I might add that the typical greenfield, the sprawling kind of development that you might see in other locations is very, very expensive to chase that, because that eventually needs replacement. And keeping it compact as possible helps reduce the cost, and in fact returns, provides a better return to the community.
There's just no escaping spending. Growth is expensive. Thank you.
Thank you. I see no more questions or comments from council. Go ahead.
So you've seen this table before in some of our presentations, but it compares Nanaimo to other like-sized and neighboring communities with regards to the utilization of their debt servicing limit. So in 2022, Nanaimo is sitting in the middle of the pack when you compare it to those other like-sized communities. And then we have in there Ladysmith and Parksville as our neighbors. So we're kind of in the middle of the pack. A couple are lower and several are higher. So 2023 information isn't ready yet, so that's why we have 2022. And our last slide is a graph on 2022 debt per capita, and this is how Nanaimo sits in comparison to those other communities that were on the previous slide. And again, we're kind of in the mix there of Nanaimo's is $405 per capita, and the highest is $1,883 per capita in Ladysmith, and the lowest is in Parksville at $371. And that is the end of our presentation. I'll be happy to take any more questions.
Go ahead, Councilor Kesselbrock.
Thanks. So if we took on like everything today on that, we're adding about $600 per person per house.
So
this debt per capita.
This is actual, so for 2022, so last year, or 2 years ago, I guess now, this is our debt per capita, so how we compared to others in the last information. This does not include any new, we haven't projected out because we don't know what other communities are going to do, but this gives you an idea of where we sit as of today.
Oh,
Yeah.
do you know, like, say, what we'd roughly jump up? Say if we did everything just in 2022, if we went out and borrowed it tomorrow, that would...
We could probably, we'll calculate that for you, and it shouldn't take too long.
Yeah.
1,200.
Our computers are down, so I can't,
Yeah.
I'll get it to you, though.
I think the mayor's quick calculations put it just over 1,100.
That's not debt per capita, though.
Chair, may I?
Please.
That's $1,148 increase on the average home for taxes. Bigger home, more expensive home, you're paying more. But for the average home in Nanaimo, it would be $1,148 a year increase in taxes alone for that, for the purposes of all this capital expenditure.
At the height of borrowing.
At the height of,
the height
like if
of
we,
borrowing.
as Councillor Gesselbrock has said, if you borrowed it all tomorrow and you owed it all tomorrow, that's what it would add to the existing tax bill that you received. So if your tax bill, I forget, our house is just below the average, I think, and I can't remember exactly what it cost, but I think it was around 25 after grant or something like that. So the Krogs would be paying 3,600 and change annually for taxes in order to support the total borrowing.
Mr. Lindsay?
Yeah, Madam Chair, I just want to make sure when we're comparing numbers, we're careful here, because the 1148 would be on an average house, where the numbers in front of you are per capita. So don't take 1148 and add it to this number and get the total, because it would be, assuming we have somewhere around 2 people in an average household in Nanaimo, for example.
Okay, thank you for that. Councillor Eastmere?
Yeah, I was just going to suggest, Madam Chair, maybe perhaps is a good time for a recess?
Yeah. Oh, is that what you were after?
Sorry, I
I'd
didn't,
like Councillor Eastmere to ask her question before we recess.
I'm sorry about
No,
that.
that's okay.
I missed that part.
I guess I actually don't, given that I don't really find the debt per capita information very helpful. I think it would be more helpful per, like, per household. And I also think it would be really interesting to have that broken out in terms of different valuations of houses, because I don't actually think we have that many that many properties that are in that average zone. We have like quite a few that are lower and quite a few that are much higher. So I'd be interested to see, just so I have a better sense of what costs people are facing when they're owning, you know, many of the newer homes, which are well over $1 million, and how that shakes out.
Thank you. I'd like to ask, just before we break for recess, Ms. Mercer, I'm noting the debt servicing, we're at a very healthy 13.5. If we decide today to pull the pin and do all of this and we shoot up in 2033 to close to 100%, are there other examples of communities that have done that for several years, just borrowed, you know, hard to get over that, to get into those assets and then go from there? It's a big jump.
So what you're asking is how is there municipalities that have just taken the plunge and done the whole thing? And
I think that's what I'm asking. I'm noting Ladysmith is the top at 55% here. We're contemplating perhaps going up to, say, 95.
Yeah.
Is that typical in a municipality when we are looking at needing so many assets?
that is something we would have to look into to see. Each municipality will have a different philosophy on debt. Some have policies where they don't have any debt on certain asset types, and whereas others are more than happy to borrow. So that is something we would have to look at, because each municipality is very different.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I see no further speakers, so if we could break until 3:45, that would be great. Thank you all.
Waiting for fall. Something seemed different. Was it the deep blue of the lapis lazuli sky, or the rush of waves in the ocean? I felt it in the air. I felt it echo across the cypress and pine-furred hills. Is it fall? I heard your whisper amidst the boughs of the wispy willow and the tremulous dance of the maple leaves as they twirl like confetti over cushions of air, turning from pale yellow to ochre. I saw you with your magic wand, gently touching lush green valleys into burnished gold, your Midas touch filling the air with wispy dandelions as a ruddy-faced moon hangs limp in the twilight sky. I inhale your soft lavender-laced breath that gently ripples the still waters of winding streams, skirting creeks and rocky ridges. Peaches and apricots are blush red, and wild bushes bend double with juicy blackberries as kids fill buckets while fingers become sticky and purple. Nobody cares, for it is fall.
If the intersection at Terminal Avenue and Commercial Street is the front door to Nanaimo, then unfortunately, its front yard needs a bit of work. It's currently the site of a big empty hole. The historic block of buildings at 6 Commercial Street first began with an auto store in the early 1900s, followed by expansions that included the Heritage Gene Burns shop in 1955. For the next 62 years, the buildings anchored the corner and housed a range of businesses, eateries, and studio spaces that were home to local artists. But on March 30, 2016, disaster struck. A massive fire ripped through part of the block, and while there were thankfully no injuries, the buildings were unrecoverable. In 2017, they were demolished, leaving a hole in this prominent corner, a hole that has yet to be filled. Honoring a commitment to downtown revitalization, the City of Nanaimo purchased the property in 2021 and set out to remove barriers that stood in the way of its redevelopment. Through community engagement, a new direction for the site was identified, a new, iconic building to anchor the heart of downtown. To visualize that potential, an exploratory design shows a positive future for 6 Commercial Street. The next step is to sell the land to a private developer who will bring the vision to life. To help things along, the city's Downtown Revitalization Tax Exemption Program eases tax demands for development that helps to revitalize downtown Nanaimo. By eliminating barriers, adding incentives, and investing where it matters, the city is helping to stimulate redevelopment to create a renewed downtown that transcends its historic legacy.
It is fall. Cloud-mottled sky, shadow-flecked Mount Benson, silver-spangled Long Lake, silent creeks echoing shrill cries of a golden eagle that resound far and wide. Sparkling streams meander lazily, their mercurial waters networking the lush green fabric of a city called Nanaimo. Come summer, bushed heavy with blueberries and blackberries, skirt trails that wind through forests of oak and age-old cedars. Ducks and herons play hide and seek among the tall, swaying bulrushes, pock-marking still waters of a pond. Daisies smile and nod through overgrown ferns and nettle, all silently waiting, an expectancy that hangs in the air, a yearning for something new, a new season, a new makeover of nature. It is fall.
Named after one of Nanaimo's most notable celebrities, Diana Krall Plaza is an open public space in the heart of downtown Nanaimo. The space is one with plenty of potential, but most days it serves as little more than a space to pass through or to access the credit union or public library that have entrances that face the plaza. In essence, Diana Krall Plaza is a space that has yet to find its heartbeat. However, one event does make great use of the space each Thursday evening throughout the summer. The night market along Commercial Street brings food trucks, artisans, vendors, and entertainers in, transforming Diana Krall Plaza into the lively destination it was always meant to be. As downtown Nanaimo is reimagined, the goal for this key plaza is to carry the energy of the night market forward in a way that sees the space used well throughout each day and every season. Diana Krall Plaza was established in the late 1990s when the Port Theatre, the Harbourfront branch of the Vancouver Island Regional Library, and the Harbourfront Parkade were built. The plaza sits atop that parkade. This was a new approach to open space in Nanaimo, but the problem? The plaza was, and typically still is, empty. As the roof of a parkade, the plaza suffers from structural load limitations. The plaza can't support big trees or heavy features. Blank walls on adjacent buildings and minimal art leaves the space feeling uncomfortable and uninviting. Over the years, design ideas were brought forward, but none were realized. That, however, is about to change. In 2020, an advisory committee of volunteers, businesses, Vancouver Island University staff, and students, and the City of Nanaimo came together to re-envision Diana Krall Plaza. Their goal? To create an actionable vision for the plaza that will lead to real change. Building on this groundwork, the project team held community workshops, a design charrette, and put in many hours of volunteer effort to create realistic ideas that would animate the space and make it feel inviting. Features like warm lighting, intriguing art, comfortable seating, and shade will bring the vision to life. The renewed space would also be a multi-purpose and ready for outdoor patio usage, informal play, and many different events, big and small. Now armed with ideas to greatly improve both the physical and social character of Diana Krall Plaza, the design development for the first phase is underway, and with it, a new rhythm is being created for the heart of downtown Nanaimo.
There's a wing flutter of starlings, little specks that swoop low and then rise, gliding over cushions of air, like the gentle crest and trough of ocean waves, to fan out in oblivion. All is quiet and still again. You send ripples through still waters of ponds, making them glisten like 1,000 prisms bathed in the brilliance of a fall morning. Come dusk, you blow harder, and the leaves of the sprawling oak tree pirouette and glide in the air like little ballerinas, then sink onto the ground below.
Leaders in Training program is a youth leadership program, and I like to say that our main goal is to train youth leaders, and the happy side effect is that we create volunteers in the process.
It's
actually been offered for 40 years this summer, which is so exciting. And it's a great opportunity for youth ages 13 to 18 to just come on out, try new things, come out of their bubble a little bit.
And so it's really a program about kids and young people learning about themselves, about their community, about how to be leaders and really give back. LAT program started in 1982, and that's our introductory leadership programs. And then if they like the program and they successfully complete it, then they can join our Quest program, which is kind of level 2 of leaders in training.
I'm the creator. Yeah, that's me. I started the program 40 years ago because working parks and rec playgrounds, which they hired me to do when I was a wee little thing, I noticed and might have got myself into a little bit of trouble a few times by including youth who needed something to do. And they were hanging around with all these little kids. I'll give you only one story. We did a haunted house and the youth wanted to help me. I'm like, cool beans. And so we want to do oil and noodles and grapes and make this brain thing. I'm like, cool. I remember the little kids loved it. And I do remember they were coming out black because they used car oil. Skip ahead 3 years. And I said, look, we really need something for the youth. We need something in the summertime. And that was the creation of the Junior Leadership Program. It went crazy. We had 40 kids the third summer. We expanded into leaders in training because the kids kept coming back.
When something works so well, it keeps going and it keeps evolving. And a program like the Leaders in Training, we don't see many programs in local government or in our communities that last that long.
I met Karen in the junior leader and then the Leaders in Training program. I know that Karen became wildly and is wildly successful as a fire chief, including our own Nanaimo, and she's moved to the mainland. She was a junior leader in training. She was fabulous, full of energy with the kids.
I looked up a lot to those leaders. I was a leader in training, but those leaders were really strong role models for me. And this is a really good opportunity to have that positive influence in a lot of our young children's lives.
You're putting junior leaders, and these are still pretty young people themselves, with little kids. They have to think past themselves. Those age groups aren't always cooperative. You have to think how to problem solve, how to work with people.
My career now, I obviously manage a large group of people, and that was the first experience doing that.
Because it's like where you get to just hang out with the kids.
Can you imagine all of those skills that she took forward into a position of firefighting in itself and helping people who were really anxious and stressed and afraid, and then moving into leadership as chief of fire department?
I've always wanted to be a teacher from as long as I can remember, and LIT solidified that fact. So being able to work with children and experience their innocence and the fact that they're continually hilarious.
It taught me a lot about compassion, patience. Sometimes you have to be firm, but fair.
And we all know that anyone can have a bad day, and it's about figuring out what makes them happy, supporting them, and putting a smile back on their face.
When you have a large group of people and you have a diverse group of individuals that all want different things, and so you got to find that balance.
Thank you for coming, Karen.
You're welcome.
The program is really for anyone ages 13 to 18 that's interested in doing a little bit of leadership. I think there's kind of a misconception that all we do is leadership programs with kids, and we certainly do a lot of work with children in day camps and summer camp placements and events, but we're about training leaders and that those skills can take you off to any section of your life.
First and foremost, they learn things like confidence and self-esteem. We teach them about professionalism, so what it's like to be actually working on the job, resume writing skills, and lots of teamwork and stuff. They meet so many people and create lots of long-lasting relationships with their peers and get out.
So we have had a very thorough staff presentation, and at this point, I would entertain motions or any further discussion or debate. Councillor Armstrong, go ahead.
Just to put it on the floor, I would like to put the South End neighborhood, or South End Recreation Center be moved as a project that we want to go forward with.
Is that the recommended motion of?
Yes,
sending
that'll be it then.
Referendum, okay, seconded by the mayor. Any discussion, debate?
I don't want to put the way in. I don't want to use referendum, just that, and then we can do that separate, please.
Thank you for that clarification. Is that what you seconded? Okay. Councillor Armstrong, do you want to speak to it?
This is something that's been missing from the South End for a very long time. There's not many public amenities out there, and it's something that I think would alleviate a lot of problems for a lot of people by having it closer to home. And I just think it's a very good thing to do for the South End residents.
Thank you. Mayor Krog?
Thank you very much, Chair, and I was happy to second this. I think those of us who are here and have been since 2018, many of us campaigned on the belief and hope that there would be, as I always call it, an Oliver Woods built in the South End, and it was certainly merited by both the population and history as well, and I won't go into that. I will say this, though, about this particular motion. I would be happy to see almost all these projects and other suggestions brought forward, because keeping in mind, we're not voting on proceeding with any project today. We are simply asking staff with this motion to begin preparations for a referendum, and then provide directions with respect to additional projects, and then third recommended motion to update costing, et cetera, so that we can look at this. I think it behooves us to consider all the needs in our community, all the folks who have lobbied us about various things, and then be able to come to a rational decision at some point what a referendum will look like, and considering the cost and the range of costs, which, and this will be a frightening thing, it'll be quoted back to me negatively, I'm sure. The $1,148 figure is a big number for a lot of folks, and I get that. But I've always been a value for money person, and assuming they were remotely close, and notwithstanding that, as Ms. Fuller wisely pointed out to me in a conversation at the break, do keep in mind, Mr. Mayor, she didn't say it like that, there will be operating costs and all of those things in addition. But it's not that big a number for the number of things that are on that list. All of which over time are going to get built in this city, no doubt, or be needed to be built. So I just want to thank staff again for the presentation, as I did earlier in the previous section. So I happily support the motion around the South End Community Centre. Let's get ready for a referendum, please.
Thank you, Your Worship. We have a bit of an issue. Councillor Armstrong moved the motion without specifying how we would acquire the funds.
I just wanted to move the recommendation that we go ahead with the build, not how we finance it, because there's other people that would like to use APP.
Thank you. I'm going to let Ms. Gurry weigh in.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I was going to ask for clarification as well, because my understanding, and Councillor Armstrong, correct me if I'm wrong, but you want to direct staff to begin preparations for seeking approval of the electors. We don't know the method yet, in the spring of 2025 for the South End Community Centre, which would mean proceeding with the community centre, South End Community Centre, but not the method determined as of yet?
No, I only want to put forward that we go ahead with the build for the South End, and then somebody is going to be making a motion for how to finance it.
For how to finance it, and what method to obtain approval?
So I only want to make the motion that we go ahead with the build, and then somebody else can make a motion as to how it's financed.
Okay, and just to clarify, because Your Worship, you were saying, so this motion is to proceed with the South End Community Centre, not
no referendum, no APP, nothing yet, just that we proceed with it, and then somebody else wants to make a motion as to how it's done, separating the issues.
Thank you. I'm going to let Mayor Krog weigh in as the seconder.
What was the line in Cool Hand Luke? What we got here is a failure to communicate.
I never answered that. They answered that. I always said. Just
I'm supportive of the staff recommendation that direct staff to begin preparations for a referendum in spring 2025 for the South End Community Centre, because if we're going to do that, we'll want to know what the potential cost is and all of those things, and that's the motion I thought I was seconding. So insofar as it goes, I'm not supportive of Councillor Armstrong's motion, which is a step much further down the road than certainly I'm prepared to go, and it would appear that based on staff recommendations, they're prepared to go.
Okay, I'm actually going to ask if there's another seconder to Councillor Armstrong's motion. I see Councillor Eastmere.
I'll speak to it.
Councillor Armstrong, go ahead.
Yeah, no, the reason that I don't want to move that recommend motion is there's been other council members that want to use a different form to financing. So I just say that I believe that my motion is that we go ahead with the build, or start the preparations for the build. How we finance it will be a separate motion.
Ms. Gurry, can I ask you, just for clarification, that we are going forward with the South End Community Build? I feel like this is already something that is in process, and staff are actually asking for direction on how we are going to fund it. Thank you, Mr. Lindsay.
Just listening to the conversation, I think Ms. Gurry's suggestion was a good one, because unless there's another motion coming where we're getting money from someplace other than long-term borrowing, we know we need approval of the electorate. So whether that's achieved through referendum or AAP is certainly a decision of council.
So then if you just may wish to, hang on.
So I think Ms. Gurry's wording.
We remove the referendum and seek for electoral or approval?
That's what we would suggest, yes. I think that would get to what you're intending.
Then
but
that works for
it'll be
me.
clear.
I just don't want it in as a referendum.
Thank you. So I'm just going to be really clear with council and say, and I welcome correction here, the motion that has been moved and seconded is that we direct staff to begin preparations to seek elector approval
Yes.
In spring 2025 for the South End Community Center. Accurate? Yes. Okay, thank you. Further conversation on that. Councilor Perino.
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to vote against this. And the reason is that I want us to make a decision today. Either we go referendum or we go AAP.
Well, that was my original motion.
And so that's, for me, this, to just begin preparations for electoral approval, to me for me, I'm just saying it feels inferior. I just want an answer whether or not it's going to be AAP or referendum. So I'd be prepared to vote for one of those and not this current motion on the floor. Thank you.
Thank you. And what I understand, I'm not aware of this, but I understand a motion is coming about how we will seek
Yes.
elector approval. So this decision is simply to say that this is a project we're behind.
Yes.
We're going to figure out how to fund it.
Yes. And then there'll be a subsequent motion after.
Councillor Gesselbrock.
Just a question to staff, regardless of AAP or referendum, to what degree and what documents do we have in place to get the cost estimate of the build are we required to have? And I guess like sometimes, like say with the Operations Center, there seems unclarity like to what degree of an estimate, what degree the drawings are made out, and how it's broken down. And so my question is like, what do we need to get ready before that so it's very clearly laid out what we're asking the community money for?
Mr. Harding?
Chair, I'll take a stab at that one. So what staff's looking for is we've done the feasibility study as council has asked us to do. If we want this to move forward as a major project, then we can now take the information we've got for the draft or the kind of concepts, come back to council with a plan of how to then progress that to some detailed costing with some detailed options for council's consideration and potentially the public's consideration on what those options could be for that facility alone, if that helps. So we've got the general broader, if we built a 65,000 square foot facility or 45,000 square foot facility, we have the general cost D analysis now, which we can bring back, but until council's given us the go ahead, we want you to start taking this now to the next level. We need that direction so we can come back to you with some of those, the next steps, and then to finalize some of those costs, as well as finalize some of the partnerships. So.
Okay, so just to follow up on that, is a Class D analysis, you just say a Class D estimate would be, has already been completed for this? Okay, so that's one stage gate. So what would be like the next detailed level that, say, if we were like, how much more investment would it take to be, okay, we ask you to go ahead and take it further than the Class D estimate. How much more money is that, and what level of detail would that provide to the public, say, before the referendum goes out?
Chair, Councilor Gesselbrock, I don't have that exact number, but if council, for example, gave us direction to proceed, we'd come back to you, we'd do some work, come back to you with some options of how to proceed. And it also is dependent upon securing the site that we want to. So the site location is a real key component for that detailed costing. So once the site is confirmed, council gives us direction, we then can come back to you with some funding requests to do some of the detailed costing, as well as what those detailed costing will include, and also some options that council may want us to include in those options.
Okay, thanks. I think it's a question I'm gonna follow up more on. I think going through the thing with the operations center, I feel that there's a certain level of expectation in terms of clarity, in terms of what a project costs and the breakdown of costs, and to the degree that it's like planned out and a certain level of certainty. And I personally am not at a place that I understand with clarity at what level do we want a project progress before we go out to the referendum for. And so I think I'll follow up on that question and then, you know, take it from there. But if there's like a standard, like anytime we're going out, or if it's different between project to project, to what degree that project is ready before the borrowing goes out to being asked.
Yeah, Madam Chair, I think we believe we have enough information now to go forward. The question becomes, as your estimates are further out, we have a Class D estimate, your contingencies are higher. So our estimates are, will be higher in the contingency area. You get certainty as we spend more money and get more details into the design. So sometimes it's a question of, well, how much money do you want to spend to get more detail if you don't know if the community's supportive of the project or not? And that's always that, where's that sweet spot at? I think, as Mr. Harding just mentioned, if we can share with the community soon where the property is, we'll be able to share a conceptual vision well in advance of the referendum, and including, you know, what the key components of that building are, along with the Class D estimates that we have. I think it would be sufficient information to very quickly proceed to the approval of the electorate.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Brown, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. I will support this motion on, I think, on the understanding that, like, immediately following this, I would hope that we would be contemplating referendum or AAP. I just find that, in general, we seem to get these staff reports around capital projects that are seeking direction and then don't provide any or don't provide enough. I think it's been, from the recommendation in the report drafted by staff, it's pretty clear that they're seeking either that next level, hey, go with this, or not. And so, yeah, I really hope we're going to follow this up with essentially the sentiment of the staff recommendation here to provide direction on this, to either, hey, fund it, or say, basically by not proceeding with the AAP, or a referendum saying, hey, okay, not at this time. It kind of comes off the priority list to the degree that it's on there. So I will support this, but I do think it's very, very clear, and we've been in this situation a lot where staff come for direction and we don't give it right away, just based on confusion or maybe a lack of comfort. And I'm optimistic that we'll provide that direction, at least on the South End Community Center here today, for staff. So thank you, Chair. And if no one else moves it within the chambers, I would like to follow up with a motion around proceeding with a funding source. Thank you.
I'm sorry. Thank you. Councillor Manley.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I'm going to support this motion. I do want to see direction on how we're going to fund this. I'm curious. I can't remember, how is Oliver Woods approved by the electorate? Was that, did we finance that ourselves, or was there long-term borrowing for it?
Your Worship, Councillor Manley, it was short-term borrowing as well as some savings and also some private contributions.
So it never went to approval. Yeah, I'm curious, just, you know, in terms of a referendum on something like the South End Community Center, where it's really focused on one end of a very long, stretched-out community, whether it's a fair process for people in other parts of the community, whether we want to have, if we were going to referendum, to have a referendum that was more inclusive of a number of projects. You know, I'd like to see the Departure Bay Walkway done. I think it's a really important community project, and you know, will leave a legacy, you know, going forward. It's completing that walkway is I think is an important project, and as are the Bevan Park amenities, which are used, you know, they're very central and used by people from either end of town. So those are just my comments at this stage, but I'm happy to support this motion right now.
Thank you, Councillor Manley. Mayor Krogh?
Thank you very much, Chair, and I confess I'm somewhat surprised by the comments of Council around the motion that Councillor Armstrong has put forward, and by that I mean this. This is a report authored by our Chief Administrative Officer, concurred in by all of the senior managers of the team. We know what the potential cost is. Let's just assume for a moment that staff aren't off base, and it's $150 million to build a South End Community Centre. We are clearly not going to pay for that out of ordinary taxation. We are going to borrow money. And that means we will either have to have an alternate approval process, or we'll have to have a referendum. We have also been presented with a number of other items. Now, with respect, arguably you could say that the South End Community Centre is a nice to have, arguably. I'm not saying it isn't, but arguably it is. The Bevan Park Master Plan and repairs that may be necessary if the roof caves in, you might be able to say is a need to have. So we have a long list of potential projects here, some of which, again, arguably need to have, some nice to have. The recommendation of staff is pretty straightforward. Begin preparations for a referendum. With respect, we're not going to send this out to an alternate approval process, I suspect, because this is not the kind of thing that I think should go to it, particularly when we are also listing...
Sorry, guys, can I just ask one person at a time?
Thank you.
Thank you.
We're also looking at a long list of other projects that are important to significant portions of our community. With respect, I think this is the time to follow staff's recommendation. If we are to go to a referendum in the spring, I am not going to support taking this to an alternate approval process on its own, and then potentially look at a referendum that deals with a whole bunch of other projects. If we're going to go to the people and give them a direct opportunity to say yes or no, it should be on a longer list with respect, which is essentially what this recommendation amounts to, as opposed to doing this as somehow a one-off with the AAP or a one-off with a referendum and then another referendum for something else. It doesn't make sense to me. So I'm not going to support Councillor Armstrong's motion. I would support what I thought I was seconding the first time round, but for those reasons, I'm not prepared to support the motion as it stands. Thank you.
Councillor Perino.
Thank you, Chair. Mayor Krogh said everything, and I feel very much the same. I'm very uncomfortable with even the thought of an AAP for something that the community desperately wants, which is not a need, necessarily a need for staff to continue to operate, whereas the NOC is for staff to continue to operate. That is absolutely vital. That's a different, this is a want. So I just wish we were following staff's recommendation, very much the same. So I'm very much in favor of the South End Community Centre, very much in favor of it. I'm just not in favor of the way this motion is going. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Perino. I do, just for clarity's sake, this is a motion to support the South End Rec Centre. How we figure out the funding of that is, I understand, coming as a second motion. So I just want to be clear about that. Councillor Gazawak.
Thanks. Yeah, I feel that, the three recommendations that are here kind of all go together, and like it may affect how one is going to the next one. Like, I think the South End Community Centre, I think conceptually it's a great idea. There's a huge need to it. There's a way of doing something different. And it may cost $150 million. And when I look at like the cost of everything else, it's just, I need to think through things more to understand, are we kind of doing this doing things in the same old way we've been doing it when everything else around us has changed around costs and where that money's coming from, and just trying to replicate something that maybe a model that isn't quite working. And so that aside, just looking at, if we were like, okay, $150 million, you know, for what we get, it's worth it, it's definitely needed, would it pass a referendum on its own when it's just, you know, focused on the south end? I don't know. Like, I think that's a very important question to like think about. And then I'm like, okay, well, can we do, we probably are at a bit of a deficit in terms of our recreational facilities in all of Nanaimo. Do we wrap things up into like a rec upgrade for Nanaimo so that rec services are properly distributed across our entire city? And these things that we probably should have built in the past, that we get this done, which would include the waterfront walkway, which everybody would benefit from, which would include some form of upgrade in Bevan in terms of multi-use buildings, which I think are probably the way to go now, where we build a structure that can be used for multiple things, that is like cheap to maintain and run, and kind of moves in things in a different direction, as opposed to these like more purpose-built structures that are quite expensive to like manage and maybe a bit more specific. So to me, those things are all wrapped up together, which is a larger, bigger ask, however. And then also the discussion of the timing, like, do we try to wrap that up for next year, 2025, and get all the conceptual plans and stuff done to go to referendum, or just tack it on with the election, and what's the impact of that? So I guess there's just a lot of different moving parts where, yeah, I personally don't feel in a place to be able to make a decision on it all at this particular moment. So that's just kind of where I'm at right now, and doing it separate is difficult. So as it stands right now, if we're just looking at the South End Rec Center for an AAP or whatever, without discussing all this other stuff, I don't think I can support it. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Eastmere.
Thank you. This has turned into a much more difficult conversation than I thought. And this motion, I thought we were just expressing whether we want to move forward with these projects, whether these are priorities for us or not. And so this motion is just like, are you behind moving forward with the South End Community Center in some way? Yes or no? And then after that, we're going to just need to figure out how we get electoral approval to fund it. And hearing from staff, there was no nice to have on the South End Community Center. It was an identified need for years. So Mayor Krogh, you said this is arguably a nice to have. No, it's not. I mean, it's going to be nice to have when we have it, because we really, really need it. And because it's going to include so many services that sector of our community really, really needs. And I think contemplating using an AAP for that, as we heard, Kelowna did similar for a rec center, and you know, it's not just recreation, it's health, it's community well-being. Like, just thinking of it as a recreation center is a misnomer because of all the other partnerships that we're looking at including in that build. So yeah, that said, I hope we can prioritize this, and when we're looking at the other two options, one being the waterfront walkway, would be real nice to have, but it's not a need at this point in the same way that this rec center is. And the Bevan upgrades, I think that's a tough conversation as well, but this motion is just, do we move forward with the South End or not? And I think that answer is clear to a lot of us.
Thank you. Councillor Armstrong.
The reason I wanted to change the motion from that way is because there's councillors at this table that may support the build, but they don't support a referendum. So it would show up on our dashboard that they're not supportive of the South End Community Neighborhood Association, because that's how the vote would show. No, there's no clarification. This way you can vote and say, yes, I'm in favor, and then it comes down to referendum or APP. That's the sole reason behind it, because I don't want people to think I'm opposed to it if I choose not to go referendum and wanted to go APP. And I'm not saying which way I'm voting because I don't know. But that is the sole purpose behind separating the motion so that people can say, yes, 9 members or 8 members of this council voted in favor of it, not 5 to 3. Because I am voting in favor of building it. I just don't know if I like the means of how to finance it.
Thank you, Councillor Armstrong. That is my speakers list. We do have a motion on the floor. I'm going to read it. And it's that we direct staff to begin preparations to seek elector approval for the South End Community Centre. I'm going to support this. I think we've pulled one motion and put it into 2, which I think complicates it, but also provides options for discussion of how we're going to fund it. So with that, I'm going to call the question. All those in favor? Councillor Armstrong, Councillor Eastmere, Councillor Gesserbach, Councillor Hemmons, Councillor Manley, Councillor Brown. Those opposed? Mayor Krog and Councillor Perino. I understand there's a subsequent motion coming.
Given that we heard from staff that it's been a long-standing identified need, I would move that we instruct staff to begin preparations for an alternate approval process for the borrowing for the South End Community Centre.
Is there a seconder? Councillor Armstrong. Councillor Eastmere, do you want to say anything more about it?
We always talk about the length of this community. Mayor Krog likes to say it's however many kilometers long. I think it's going to be a really hard one to ask people who live in the North End to go to the polls on one day in a referendum to say, yes, you should build a rec center in the South End. Because I don't think everyone everywhere in Nanaimo understands how desperately this project is needed. And if we're serious about supporting growth in the South End, and we know there is an intense amount of growth happening in the South End, we need to provide the services, and that includes the recreation services and all of the accompanying partnerships that this project will bring. And if you feel strongly about it, as I do, I feel that an AAP is an appropriate process, and if there is a level of if there isn't the level of community support for it, and then a referendum just happens automatically. So you'll get the referendum anyway. But I really think because of the degree of need here that this is an appropriate method of seeking electoral approval.
Thank you. I see Ms. Gurry with her hand up.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to clarify, Councillor Eastmere, it doesn't automatically go to a referendum. Council would have to choose to proceed for it to go to referendum. I just want that clarity out there. Thank you.
Thank you. In order, I have Councillors Perino, Mayor Krog, and Councillor Brown. Go ahead, Councillor Perino. Oh, my fault.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you. A question through you to staff. With the Nanaimo Operations Center, the Public Works discussion, how does that affect because we've always talked about that as being an absolute need for our, how does this affect that possible AAP? How would this work?
Sorry, through the chair, off the top of my head, I'm not sure that it would have any consequences. I think council could still, you have that decision in front of you right now on the AAP for the Public Works project. You could have multiple AAPs going at one time, so we're still recommending on that project that the AAP move forward in the fall. Council, if you wished, could still have a separate AAP in the spring for recreational services, South End Rec Center. You could do them separately.
So could you bundle them together?
I would not recommend bundling.
Just a question. I'm sorry.
I think, and again, I would really separate out the Public Works building. We've brought it forward separately from this discussion about recreational amenities because it's a need that we know we need to move forward with. So I think I would continue. My recommendation would be to continue to keep them separate.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mayor Krog.
Thank you very much, Chair, and I appreciate Councillor Eastmere referencing my comments. I said arguably, it is a nice to have as opposed to a need to have. Just as any of these projects are in the eye of the beholder, and the beholders that are important here are the voters. We have a number of projects, as I say, which, again, I repeat myself, arguably are nice to have, arguably are needs to have. The NOC is out there, the RCMP detachment expansion, a lot of things. And we have borrowing limits that we have to consider. It's why I go back to my position on the first motion in terms of a preparation for a referendum, which would, I expect and assume and presume, would include other items that this council will in fact be able to agree upon that should go to the voters who will be looked to provide their positive support for things that are important to our community. And I use the term important, not saying necessary or even valuable, but are important. And if they're truly important to the community and enough of the community come out, they will get support and be voted upon, and they will get built, and that will improve, I believe, our community. There's not an item on this list that I wouldn't love to see built. All right, I can say that right off the bat. By going down this path now of deciding when we don't have a budget and saying we're going to go to an AAP process on one project only, given our experience with the last two AAPs, with great respect, not the way to go in my view. And if people are concerned about somehow the public not understanding and taking the view that Councillors Perino and myself are opposed to the South End community project, when I have been speaking about it openly for the last 6+ years since I announced I was running for mayor, well, so be it, if that's the view they choose to take. I have supported this project and this concept consistently through my voting, but I believe it is the kind of project, along with others, that merits what was the initial decision we could have made, which is simply to begin preparations for a referendum and then consider all of these other projects as potential referendum projects. And it's just consider, it's just commence preparations. That's all we're talking about, just preparations, friends, just preparations, instead of barreling down the path, which is the way I see this now, saying, oh, well, let's put it to AAP. Sorry, it's way too early. It's premature, it's unnecessary, it serves no useful public purpose, and for that reason, I'm not going to support voting today to decide whether this goes to an AAP. It makes no sense to me. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Brown.
Thank you, Chair. You know, if I'm to read the staff report and the information presented today, if that motion would have had said AAP and someone proposed referendum, I think the intention is the exact same. Staff have said they're at the point of the project where there's enough costing, enough information, far enough down the path that a choice needs to be made on how we're proceeding. And when we look at all our funding sources, there's only really two available options. Or sorry, one available option, borrowing. The community charter essentially gives us two options to do that. A referendum, which is the staff recommendation in the report, which they're seeking that clear direction. When they say make preparations for, I assume that's finalizing all the information, the engagement plan, the high level costing, and ultimately preparing bylaws for getting to that point. The exact same process which would be required for an AAP. So really, there's three options that council can consider. Not doing the project at this time, or making those final preparations for borrowing, or doing a referendum, or doing an AAP. So for me, the question really is referendum or AAP. I will be supporting the AAP. I don't think one is lesser or one is greater as they're often portrayed. I think it's often a failure of understanding that the community charter essentially gives two options for achieving the same ends. I think this project, when I think back about, what really started municipal or public recreation. It was around a lot of the elements that I think staff have worked hard to incorporate into the high-level designs of this project. Community center, providing an outlet, in particular for youth, but everybody. It gives them the type of activities that produce and contribute to fulfilling and constructive life, both as an individual and as a community. That's kind of the founding principle of public rec. And I think this project really tries to capture that sentiment. You know, we're a city of over 100,000 people. That starts to look a little different at times, but you know, whether there's a library element, a public health element, you know, flex space, housing. Again, I think it all comes down to that sentiment. So I'm going to happily support this project, and I think AAP is the appropriate mechanism, as Mr. Harding touched upon there. It's not that AAP hasn't been used for these type of this type of capital expense elsewhere. Kelowna very recently, I think it's 280 million. You know, quite a significant amount. I think we do a disservice to what the community charter actually says when we create a false distinction between an AAP or a referendum as one being for a certain type of project and another being for a different type of project. That just doesn't exist. It doesn't exist in the legislation. So again, yeah, I'm supporting the AAP. I think it's a great project, and I hope we can proceed it to the next level. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Eastmere.
Has Councillor Armstrong spoken yet?
I'm not sure. Go ahead, Councillor Armstrong.
Just a couple questions. I know Oliver Woods was built without electoral approval just because it came under what was required. Is that correct?
Your Worship, sorry, Chair, to Councilor Armstrong, it came out of what, sorry?
Oliver Woods, did that have to go to electoral or it didn't have to, right?
There were savings and there was.
What about the NIC or the NAC? Did they have to go to electoral approval?
So the Aquatic Center was a referendum.
Referendum, okay.
And the Ice Center was combined with the New Nanaimo Center referendum, which included this building here.
So they're referendums, okay, thank you. I'm just, one of the concerns I do have, and I think Councillor Eastermer did say it, that it's really difficult sometimes when you live in a different part of the city to vote for another part of the city to get something. You know, and this is the only part of the city that really doesn't have anything. So I'm still struggling on which way I'm going to go, whether I do AEP or referendum. So I just want to hear more arguments, because I just think it's, you know, grossly unfair that all the other parts of the city have recreational activities and the south end has none. Like, or the Chase River area, let me rephrase that, Chase River area has nothing and has no city facilities other than one fire hall. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Manley. The list is growing.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I'm very much in favor of the South End Community Center going forward. I'm, you know, unsure about whether I would want to be supporting an AAP for it or not. I find that, yeah, I would prefer actually to see a referendum that had a number of things tied together. The waterfront walkway is also really an important recreation asset. You know, gets people out walking along our beautiful coastline. It's a tourist asset. And the Bevan Park Master Plan as well. I think, you know, just looking at the report, it seems like those two things, the walkway and the South End Community Center, are a little closer to going forward than the Bevan Park Master Plan in terms of what's ready for costing. But I think I'm more in favor of having a referendum for all three of those things that just says we want, you know, are you in favor of improving recreation facilities and recreational access in the community, and it spreads it out over the whole city. So those are my thoughts for now anyway. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Manley. I'm going to go to Councillor Eastmere now. There is a list, but Councillor Eastmere got bumped for Councillor Armstrong, so go ahead.
In the staff report, it says that the next step is to proceed with obtaining approval of the electorate for the necessary borrowing. So, and that was referring to the potential referendum on the South End Rec Center. So it's not a referendum to the community on are you a fan of this project? And then it comes back to us again to figure out how we obtain electoral approval for the borrowing. That is when people are deciding. So the referendum that we're theoretically talking about for the South End Community Center, it's not going to the community to say, give us a prioritized list of, out of these 3 projects, which one do you think is most important, or which ones do you want done? The referendum is, do you want us to borrow the money for this project or not? And so if you're bundling them together, you're saying, yes, borrow money for all 3 of those projects. And we cannot, we can't use that much of our debt servicing. I just don't think it's going to be possible to do all 3 of those projects. So then you're putting it to the community to choose which one of those 3 they like the most. And I think that does a disservice to the South End community and the need for this recreation center, because maybe I have this wrong, but.
Ms. Gurry's gonna weigh in here.
Thank you, Chair. I'm sorry if there was a question asked of me, but what I was going to say is there are a couple methods for grouping items together for a referendum. And one is the ultimate price, the borrowing cost for all of those projects. And it's, do you wish to borrow up to such and such money for South End Community Center, waterfront walkway, Bevan Park improvements? And it's one question. So some folks in the community will come out and vote because they want a South End Community Center. Some folks will come out and vote because they want a waterfront walkway. You could have separate ballots or separate questions that have each of those in a referendum that are dealt with at the same time as well. So there's 2 different methods of getting that. I believe for the Nanaimo Aquatic Center, or for that question, it was a combined question with the Nanaimo Conference Center here. So it was a combined question together. The ice, sorry, the Ice Center, the Nanaimo Ice Center.
Councillor Smear, are you good there?
No, I think, honestly, I think my point stands, that the rec center is a need, and I would be interested in going to referendum on things like the Bevan Master Plan and the waterfront walkway, but I don't agree with including the South End Rec Center in that, and I think that there's 2 different ways to seek electoral approval on this, and the AAP is a perfectly appropriate method.
Thank you. Councillor Perino. Oh, I just turned you off. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. I appreciate the comments. It's not going quite in the direction that I had thought it would. So it's fascinating to hear everything. The struggle that I'm having is that the Operations Center / Public Works is absolutely vital to keeping Nanaimo running. We can't do without it. We absolutely have to have it. That's why I have always drawn the line that that's where we have an AAP. I actually, Councillor Gesselbrock, I really liked your idea about having a referendum for recreational extras that our community desperately wants, loves, appreciates, will use for the long term. I would much rather see a bundling of some of those activities to find out where the community is and what they want to do, similar to what was done in the past. So I want to see the South End Community Center go, but I want the public to have the opportunity to come forward and say, I want the South End Community Center, I want the walkway, because we can live without those items. We can't live without a public works yard. We have to have that for the operation of our city. This isn't an option. That's why, for me, the referendum works on the items that we could live without, but we really want to have. And I want the public to be a part of that. I want them to honestly know exactly what that encompasses, what the costs are, what it will provide. I want them to see it all just like we have done with the Operational Center Public Works Yard. I want them to see it, but the difference is that one we can't live without. That's why I can't support this. I just can't. I can't support the direction of this.
Thank you, Councillor Perino. Councillor Geselbrock.
Thanks. I mean, I think there's good points sort of being made on all sides. Part of my mind's going back to right now, the general sentiment that I get in the community is people are wigging out about affordability and cost about things. That's the main concern. I don't hear, people coming out about these amenities as much, and I think when we look at, say, for the South End Rec Center, you build a rec center that has multiple partners, there's health amenities there, there's recreational amenities, there's community group space. We know that that's going to make a healthier, more functional society and probably reduce, hospital and healthcare costs and be good. But most people aren't vibing on that sort of level of thought in terms of the benefit to the community, and a lot of people freaking out like, oh, doing AAP and trying to like slip something by because this, and maybe it's a smaller, more vocal part of the community, but I think in general there's just sort of this feeling. And so I struggle just on the cause of stuff, like $150 million for a building, and we are trying to like lobby the federal and provincial government for a new way of setting up the financial way that we support municipalities, and is it fair to have this on income tax? Like, there's a lot of different things going on at once, and I think as council putting ourselves in a position of just like, yeah, this is needed because we feel that it's going to be long-term benefit in AAP. I don't actually feel 100% okay with that, and I think to just have the cost up front to people, we think this is really important, and have a set of things bundled together. I'm leaning more towards in that direction. Like, I think that if we are going to do a referendum, we should do the recreational upgrade, and I wouldn't want to put a referendum just on the South End facility, because I think that would be unfair to the South End folks that really need this recreational upgrade, and I don't think the people in the North End are going to come out in droves to like vote in support of it. And so I can really see the argument of doing an AAP. It's a needed facility, and it changes the threshold a little bit. But people are also upset about that. So I don't think there's any winning, for example. And I think like the fairest thing is just put it out to the community. These are the things that are going to improve our community. The walkway, and maybe some upgrades at Beban, and let folks decide. So I think that's the direction that I'm going to be going, and I think later on in this discussion we are going to have a discussion on those other items that we could potentially roll in with this. I think 2025 is a little bit rushed, to be totally honest, to like do that referendum, though. I don't know why it needs to be next year, and so I'm a little bit uncomfortable with that timeline, and think that it could be even the next election. Like, there's a lot of other things that we need to do, and there's a lot of other financial pressures that I don't see a huge public pressure to rush these things to get going next year. I don't see any argument for that. So that's one aspect, but I'm not going to support just setting this up for an AAP right now, and want to have a discussion about the other aspects of it, and go from there. Thank you.
Thank you. Mayor Krogh.
Thank you, Chair. Let us remind ourselves what the alternate approval process means. The good folks of the South End who will see the benefit of a community centre will not be voting. They'll want it, but they can't go out and put a positive X on a ballot and say, I want it and I'm willing to pay for it. The people who will be listening carefully, I would hope, to this debate and this discussion in the North End, who perhaps want the waterfront walkway, who realize that we need a Bevan Park Master Plan facility implementation plan, who recognize that the Public Works Yard is important, will say, I'll get out and I'll vote in the AAP by sending in my form, which will shut down the community center in the South End, because I'm saving my bucks to vote in the referendum that's clearly coming on all these other projects which are important and from which I will draw some benefit. Now, I'm not saying that will figure in every voter's mind, But the alternate approval process is a negative process in this sense. You are saying to people, we're going to do it unless you oppose it, and there's a whole bunch of people who we know opposed the basics, which Councillor Perino's argued so passionately and eloquently for today, which is our Nanaimo Operations Center, which every council has said for years is important. And if it's important, it is the kind of thing one would have thought an AAP process would have proceeded smoothly and it would have passed. Now, I'm conscious that based on the numbers, it didn't get anywhere near it, but I don't want to put at risk the South End Community Center by going to an AAP process, because I am of the view that a larger list of important projects will bring out the voters who will have to engage in what everybody does in the political process, which is recognize that there is some compromise. I remind everyone, I don't use the ice. I don't skate. I don't use the swimming pool. But I will certainly vote for them if an improvement came or it came up again, because I recognize I'm part of a larger community. Narrowing down the community center to go to an AAP process that could fail when we're talking about referenda for other projects, I think is a poor mix and is a poor way to go. I don't see it as being sensible. I'm not with Councillor Gesselbrock, I might add, in terms of putting this out there. The springtime is the last sensible time for us to go to the people of this city with a referendum on major projects that are important. But I can't support an AAP process with the South End Community Association. I repeat, it is important. I think it's necessary. Is it a necessity in the sense of a need to, like the knock? No, it's not in quite the same category. But boy, having argued for it for all these years, I'd like to see it proceed, but I think seeing it proceed as part of a larger referendum package in which the good citizens of Nanaimo can look at their community and say, what kind of legacy do we want to leave to the next generation and build in our community? I think they will respond positively. I have more faith in the voters than some people do, but I also have enough faith to know you don't need a lot of them to come out and say, I'm hedging my bets, I'm turning down the South End Community Center because I've got a longer list of items that council is putting to me in a referendum at some point in the future, and that's when I'll cash in my chips, so to speak. So my position hasn't changed. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Armstrong.
That is my biggest concern, is what goes in the bundle. Because I can tell you right now, and I know many of my friends, if the Waterfront Walkway Parkway goes in there, will not be voting in favor, because they definitely see that as a really nice to have and not a need. Especially because the first, so if you end up putting the South End neighborhood in there, they're not going to get the votes. That's my biggest concern. And to me, I campaigned on building that. And for me, that's why I'm really struggling, because I don't know what else is going to be pooled with it. That is my biggest concern. Now, if the South End Center was put in with the police station and the Public Works to go to referendum, I'd support that 100%. But I can't support it being put in with a walkway, which I know a lot of people don't want right now, because it's for $100 million at least. I mean, our previous one was what, I think 45 or 50 million, and we've seen all of our construction costs triple in that, so it could go up to 110, 120 for something that do we really need? And then we're going to have to build parking lots, because there's no place to park to connect to get to the walkway at Departure Bay. Like there's such a big issue with all of this that's my biggest concern, and that's why I do lean towards the APP, for the simple fact I don't like not knowing what things are going to be put into a package with this. So I'm just really struggling with this whole process without knowing. I mean, some people say the walkway's a priority for them. It's certainly not for me. You know, so like, what's going to be in this big bundle? So I guess maybe I could vote for referendum and then vote against what goes in the bundle. I guess that's a way to deal with it. So I don't know, I'm still on the fence. I'll wait to see what Councillor Brown says. Thanks.
Thank you. And just for clarity from Ms. Gurry, the determination of whether we're going to bundle it and say we're going to borrow X amount for these projects, or whether we want your opinion on each of these projects, that's to be determined. That's something that that's a choice we'll make in the future. Okay, thank you. Councillor Brown.
Thank you, Chair. Sorry, I'm just pulling up just a couple notes as people were talking. So, this will be the last time I speak on this, but I just want to say, first, I think we do need to be careful how we talk about AAPs, because we are utilizing them for different projects, and I feel like some of the language today being used kind of suggests it's it's somehow more, not as legitimate as a referendum. So I would just express caution there because they are valid and the decision ultimately is one of council here. I think this conversation around bundling also concerns me a little bit, because I think if you took a look at those total costs and in our experience with AAPs, how hard it is to just have an information campaign on one project. Imagine adding 2, 3, 4. Imagine adding a huge amount of money as part of that conversation. And I know you could say, hey, they're individual. But if you're going to the polls, you might be going with your selection, but you don't know how it's going to play out, even if they are separate. So I think on that engagement piece and on the information piece and that public education piece, should be enough to really pause and say, okay, what are we bundling? If they're not like things, I think there's a lot of risk there. I think also we have to think about our project capacity, and any project that comes online is likely to have an operational component that we really haven't considered. The operation, whether it's just the project management team, but also, bringing on a rec center is going to have operational costs. Just as building the new walkway is, as you add in more trails, you're going to need new crews, etc. So, add in multiple projects with a much shorter timeline. It's going to put a lot of stresses there, and ones that I don't necessarily think that we've thought through fully as council. And finally, I would just kind of conclude with this. Whether it's an AAP or whether it's a referendum or not, I think you're going to find pros and cons with each for the South End, for the community as a whole. This project has been identified for a long time. There's a huge need. If anyone hasn't been to Oliver Woods, try getting community space to set up a game for you and some friends. Try going to some of the drop-in programs. You go there from the morning to the evening, that place is packed. This is bigger, so is our city. So I agree with Councillor Reesmer here. There is a genuine need. It's been well planned for. The case has been built. And this hasn't been sprung upon us. This has been like a continued conversation to the point that some very serious decisions have been made or direction has been given. This is the final one in the sense of how do you want to pay for it if you proceed? It's fine if council says, no, let's not proceed. Hey, okay, maybe at a later date. But that's the decision now. So I don't think we should get cold feet in making that decision. Referendum was to get ready for a referendum. AAPs to get ready for an AAP. It's that simple. I don't think if we say yes to this, it doesn't mean we can't then consider a few other items and what the approach might be for that. It could be you get to a very multiple campaign on a couple of them where it makes sense. Other ones it might be, okay, we're supportive of this project, but let's stagger it. So I don't think we should get caught up in just being surprised by this at all, not having the information, because that due diligence really has been done. So council's got to make a decision one way or the other. Making a decision on this doesn't preclude making a decision on some other items and thoughtfully approaching them. But I will note some of those conversations probably aren't as mature as this one has been with council. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Brown. That's it for my speakers list. I have a couple of questions. And I'll start by saying I certainly found advantageous the proposal that we do the referendum bundled. And I thought next spring was a good opportunity to do that and the right time to do that. That said, I've always felt that the South End Community Centre could go through the AAP process for the rationale that I've used for the AAP process previously. However, I'm deeply concerned about our 2 failed AAPs concerning the Public Works Yard and the community's impression of our ability to run AAPs, or not ability, but just the community's perception of AAPs overall at this point. And I am curious, without understanding how we would frame the referendum questions, whether it's one big package or individual projects. I'm not, my questions. if a referendum fails, can we go back and do an AAP? And likewise, so if it fails at referendum, it's dead in the water.
Thank you, Chair. So good, great question. So if you do a referendum and it fails, you cannot reconsider a bylaw for 6 months afterwards. So with an AAP, however, if the AAP meets that threshold and gets more than 10%, you have a choice to go to a referendum or not. Should it go to referendum and fail there as well, then it's the 6-month period again that you have to wait at least before you can consider that bylaw or another bylaw.
Thank you for that. And on Monday's agenda, we are considering an AAP process for the Public Works Yard. So that would indicate that we are going to have 2 AAPs in the next, what's the time frame for that?
Good, another great question, Chair. So staff would come back with proposed timelines for when those AAPs could and should be held. There's lots of things that would come into consideration, especially with borrowing amounts. I think that we wouldn't be ready, perchance, for the South End Community Center until the spring of 2025, regardless of the method, whether it be AAP or referendum. But we would report back to you on options for timing. And Mr. Lindsay might have.
Sorry, I just wanted to clarify. Your first motion you passed today was, as I understood it, to go seek electoral approval in the spring of 2025. So that. Sorry, Madam Chair. I thought Council's first motion was just change referendum. So I thought that decision had been made already from Council. But if it had not, I would continue to say that the recommendation would be this fall for the Public Works facility, so that we can move forward with that project. And then would be the second AAP, if that's the route Council selects, would be spring of 2025.
Thank you. Councillor Geselbrock?
Thank you. Just a question for staff. Say for borrowing for multiple projects, does that constrain us? Like, I mean, I think Councillor Brown raises a point around just sort of like our operational capacity. Say we borrow $200 million, and we've got to build the waterfront walkway, the rec center, and the Bowen upgrades. Do we got to do it in a certain time? And then, like, it sounds like that. Is there a chance that you'd have to increase operational costs by having more consultants coming in to support that? And I'm just curious, some commentary on that.
Yeah, through the chair, that's an excellent question. And the answer is absolutely yes. I think on any of these major capital projects, should Council wish to go forward, especially if you bundle them, we're not going to have success if we do it off the side of someone's desk. So we would need to bring in temporary bench strength to help move those projects forward. Not uncommon. We do it from time to time. We just did it for the fire hall, for example, where we brought in expertise to help us on projects like that. So that would be part of the delivery of those. Ms. Mercer can correct me, but if you bundle the projects, you do have that time frame constraint of 5 years, where you need basically to make your borrowing within that time. So it's really, you hit go once the referendum or AAP is approved and you have that permission for borrowing. We need to move forward so that we meet that 5-year timeline.
Okay, thank you. And just some comments. You know, I think the bundling also is a strategy to get a yes vote by getting multiple people coming out. Just as sort of like, you know, AP, and I think Councillor Brown does make an important point, is like, I don't think that it is appropriate to delegitimize the AAP as a legitimate democratic exercise of your opinion. And I think we do disservice by not choosing it, saying that a referendum is somehow more legitimate. Because I think where the issue is that we need to just get out and communicate about projects, and that makes it accessible and transparent and democratic, so that, you know, with mail out of explaining why a certain project, regardless of whether it's an AEP or a referendum. When I just think about sort of like the risks of borrowing everything together, and then also the staggering of borrowing, I am sort of tending to sway towards having a crack at an AAP for the South End rec center in the spring. If there's a lot of opposition to it, there's a lot of opposition to it. People vote out and they can vote it down. But it is something that we have been moving forward. There's a need for it, and if that's something that this council wants to get done, I think that probably out of all the options, in terms of being able to pull it off effectively and getting the proper approval for it, that this actually is the way to go. So I think I'm shifting my perspective on this and would support going out for an AAP, and then if the waterfront walkway, which I think is an important thing that we need to do, and maybe some better upgrades, to have that as a referendum, say in 2026 when we go, you know, during the election or something like that. And so I think I do support AAP for the South End, and we'll be voting in favor of this motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Gesselbrock. I'm also going to vote in favor of an AAP for the South End Community Centre, simply because I think it's going to increase our chances of getting built. My question for staff: if a potential motion comes after this regarding the waterfront walkway and the Bevan Park Master Plan, and those do go to referendum, and this passes, we could potentially be looking at a schedule of a fall AAP for the Public Works Yard, a spring AAP for the South End Community Centre, and a spring referendum for the waterfront walkway and the Bevan Park Master Plan, if that motion comes from this table.
So, Madam Chair, I think if this motion passes, the next discussion about whether you want to do anything else at all is on the table. The option would still be available to council. You could bundle those projects, whatever they are, with an AAP for the South End, or you could do a separate referendum. That we keep referring back to the AAP process in Kelowna. They did a recreation and recreational facilities AAP that was actually for the renovation of one center, the building of two new centers, and playfield. So it was a multiple project AAP. So that option is available to council. You're right, though, if council decided to do an AAP for the South End, we could potentially have that, and if you still want to move on the other projects with referendum, parallel projects going on, parallel processes going on.
Thank you. Councillor Manley?
Thanks. Yeah, I agree with Councillor Brown in terms of the AAP process. I think that in fact it gives residents way more options in terms of providing a response. The referendum, you have to show up one day to cast a ballot. An AAP, now that we're allowing electronic submissions as well, is a very easy process over a 30-day response period. And you know, the idea that it's not a legitimate process is frankly kind of ridiculous, because it is there in the legislation, and it is quite available for people to use. We can always go to a referendum if an AAP fails on the South End Community Centre. I've always taken that option too, that about the need to have and the nights to have, and I do get the point about it being a real need in the South End, and there is a real lack of recreation facilities in the South End, and so I think their time has come, and yeah, so that's my reflection. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Manley. I see no other speakers, so I'm going to call the question on the AAP for the South End Community Centre. All those in favour? I see Councillor Eastmere, Councillor Gesselbrock, Councillor Hemmons, Councillor Manley, Councillor Brown. Opposed? Mayor Crow, Councillor Armstrong, and Councillor Perino. That passes. Yeah, me too. Me too. Okay. So thank you, everyone. That was a great conversation. It's 5 o'clock, but with permission, I think we do want to, can we just carry on this conversation for?
There's no motion required. This isn't in our procedure bylaw that it ends at 5 o'clock. It's for timing calendar-wise. So as long as you are available to stay to consider the next one, there's no motion required. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. The second recommended motion is to provide direction with respect to additional projects that we may wish to potentially include. This references a referendum question, but just if there's any further conversation on projects, Councillor Manley?
Well, I would like to move that we ask staff for additional, an update on costing, develop a project scope, and return with some, with information for the waterfront walkway and the Bevan Park amenities improvements. And I don't want to make a decision about a referendum or an AAP at this point, but I would just like to see more information about what the potential costs of those things would be.
Thank you. Questions, comments? All those in, oh, pardon me, Mayor Crowe, go ahead.
Thank you very much, Chair. I was perfectly prepared to move what is the recommended motion number 2, provide direction with respect to additional projects that may wish to potentially, including everything that is on the list that staff provided. Is it going to hurt us to have a commentary about potential projects, all of which are important in my view? Not one of them is something that shouldn't be done over time. And then direct staff to update costing with respect to all of those items, so that we can at some point make a well-informed decision about what we may wish to either send to a series of AAPs or a referendum. So I would prefer a much more expansive motion than what Councillor Manley has suggested, with just respect to the few. And for that reason, unless there's some change of view, I may well just vote against his motion on the basis that I think we should direct staff, as they provided the list of all these important things, to include them all. And then I would support the third motion, directing them to provide us with costing and some project scope, just to get some idea of what we're talking about. To come back to what I said earlier about the numbers that Ms. Mercer put out, which, with respect, she acknowledges are not accurate numbers. They're based on generalities, but with some more specific information that would be extremely useful for me when it comes to considering a referendum question and what might be on the referendum.
Would you like to move an amendment?
I would move that Councillor Manley's motion be amended to include all of the projects that are listed in the staff report.
Seconded by Councillor Perino. Discussion. Councillor Geselbrecht.
So just clarity, like, so there's the bullet pointed ones, which include like the waterfront walkway and the Bevan Park amenities, but you're also asking for the RCMP station, all those?
Go ahead.
Just so I'm clear, all of the items, and so let's list them if we're clear. Obviously, the South End Community Centre has been dealt with. The waterfront walkway, the Bevan Park Master Plan, the Nanaimo Public Works Yard, RCMP detachment expansion, the Wellcox secondary access, the Vancouver Island Conference Centre, future emergency services, the Stadium District. We're not getting any numbers yet on parks and trails and water supply and all those other things, but and I'm not going to include them, but I would include all of those to get some idea of the total range. In other words, the projects, with respect, that Ms. Mercer listed, are up on the big screen, so to speak, that totaled $1,148 in terms of potential tax increases.
Yeah. Okay, Ms. Gurry.
We don't have a motion coming forward on Monday for the public works. So why would you include that in those? It's coming forward on Monday.
Was that seconded? Yeah, okay. I think, did you say, Mr. Lindsay?
Sorry, I was just going to maybe, in terms of clarification, I was just going to say, I think maybe it was where Councillor Armstrong was going. So we have the outstanding recommendation from GPC that's going to be considered at your upcoming council meeting. We also have a direction from council already to proceed with alternatives on the RCMP building and bring them back. Part of the reason in this report why we highlighted the waterfront walkway in Bevan, is we thought those projects are more near-term in time frame and probably further advanced. So we could absolutely do what you're suggesting and bring back more information. But because of how far out some of those projects are, some of them have a horizon of 10 years, 15 years, 20 years beyond, when you talk about the dams, our cost estimates are still going to be very, very rough estimates. Like without doing, you know, I would be nervous for council to spend money on doing a bunch of work to get final numbers on a project that's 15, 20 years out plus. That would be my hesitations, but happy to bring back those and flesh those out the best we can.
If I may, Chair, I'm always happy to take advice from the CAO and withdraw the two that have been mentioned, the substantive ones. But I just think we need to have some idea of the projects that we're talking about that are likely to be needed in the next little while. The secondary access, if we are to proceed with development on One Port Drive and work with Synamic, that seems to me something that we're going to have to consider. Maybe the future emergency services, we get some idea of what a new fire hall, whether it's even necessary, stadium district, but the RCMP expansion is coming back to us anyway. Public Works, yes, coming back to us, all right. But then the others, I think, are definitely on the near horizon, or should be in the near horizon. We know the condition of Bevan Park and the waterfront walkway, regardless of whether you see it as fluff or something that would be nice to have, was the chosen most popular project of the good citizens of this city some years ago, and I haven't heard anyone turn around and say, gee, they didn't like the concept of a waterfront walkway.
So did I hear you say that you're withdrawing based on CAO advice?
Those two items.
Those two, and the seconder agrees? So we are on the main motion moved by Councillor Manley, which is that staff further cost out and bring back a report on the waterfront walkway with no decision on how we gain elector approval. And Bevan Park. Okay.
Sorry, can you say that again? I thought the amendment was all projects except for RCMP and Public Works. Is that correct?
The amendment was pulled off the table.
Why didn't he pull it off? I thought he just pulled off the Public Works and the RCMP detachment. He just pulled off those two. And Fire Hall.
Chair, can I call point of order?
Yeah.
We shouldn't be
Yeah,
doing
this is getting quite confusing without being specific about the projects in the report.
Can we go just to the original?
So Chair,
Well-
you could ask Councillor Brown what his point of order is, but it might be that, just some clarification on the amendment being withdrawn, but Councillor Brown, could you provide, what your point of order
Yeah,
is?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Ms. Gurry. You know, the original motion, I think, was for prioritization and identifying two projects, where the amendment was essentially to do all of them with zero prioritization. So I don't think it actually is just merely adding another project. It fundamentally alters the intention of the original motion. Thank you.
So, Ms. Gurry, you're gonna have to help me out here. Am I being asked to rule on whether this amendment is, can you just help me out with my decision?
So I think you would have had to rule on whether the amendment was out of order. However, Councillor Brown might have jumped in before the amendment's been withdrawn with agreement from the seconder, as far as I'm concerned.
But the amendment only excuse me, Councillor Armstrong, I need to ask these questions. The amendment was moved to include all of the projects listed in the staff report, and then Mayor Krogh rescinded two of those projects, and I don't
Okay,
know.
I thought he rescinded the entire
I
amendment.
thought he did too, but that's why we're so.
Okay, so then I think the point of order that you would rule on is that amendment in order? Because, and I believe it's up to the chair to rule, but it would be whether that is in order or not, or is in contrary to the intent of the original motion.
You look like you want to say something. Go ahead.
I'm happy to withdraw the motion to amend, and we can start fresh and clean if that would assist
Thank
people
you. That
in
assists
understanding
greatly.
where we're at. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So we are back to Councillor Manley's original motion. Okay, so we're all clear on what this is?
Which is?
That Councillor Manley, go ahead.
Move that we get further information and financing for the waterfront walkway, Departure Bay section, and the Bevan Park amenities for the Bevan Park master plan.
Thank you. And that has been seconded. I do have a question before we vote on this. My understanding from the staff report is that these are the two projects that we have all that information on. We're being asked, how do we want to fund that? Mr. Lindsay?
Yeah, thank you. That's a good point. So I think in the report, it outlines our last cost estimate we did for the waterfront walkway. So what we'd want to do, assuming this motion passes, is go back and update the cost estimates for that. We put some escalation in your report, but we want to nail that down so we have the most up-to-date information as possible before you decide what to do with that project in the fall. And then the second part is we introduced to you, I think really today, although it's been very much on your radar, components of Bevan Park, what Bevan Park could be. So I think fleshing out a little bit like a multi-use building, for example, bringing that back to council, a field house, bringing that back. These are the cost of these elements, and then it would give council the information, or the committee hopefully the information it needs to make a recommendation on whether one or more components of that then become the referendum. So just fleshing out, updating cost estimates, and giving you a little bit more information on Bevan.
Thank you. So we are asking for further information with no direction to staff about how we will raise the funds for the waterfront walkway and the Bevan Park master plan. I have a few people on the speakers list that they're holdovers. Does anyone have anything they want to say? Councillor Gesselbrock, go ahead. Pardon me?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's been seconded for the whole time.
Yeah, I'm in support of getting this information. I think that the update on the waterfront walkway is important, and then we can look at, potentially how we'd want to bring that forward to the public. I definitely would be more interested in sort of staggering the asks, but we can have that discussion down the road. As with the Bevan Park amenities, I'd also like more information on this, and I would be, in terms of the different amenities from that master plan, that the Bevan Park master plan was quite extensive, and there was a lot of different things in there. I'm mostly interested in multi-purpose building that could be used for markets, could be used for different community groups, that could potentially be modified, warming, cooling center, that very multifunctional and simple. My question to staff is sort of in terms of Bevan Park amenities. I mean, there's quite a wide range of that. Would we be stepping this now and come back like, okay, here are the range of different things that could be included in this. This is what we would suggest or not suggest to sort of pare down, or would you be costing out everything that was in that plan and bringing it back to council?
Through the chair, I'd hesitate to say costing out everything in the Bevan Park master plan, because it's certainly a very comprehensive long-term plan. I think it'd be fair to say we'd bring back to council costing on a multi-purpose multi-purpose building. We'd bring back to council updating cost and opportunities for a field house, like an indoor artificial field, basically. And then also some options on upgrades to the existing facility, which are much needed and have been contemplated for many years. I think those are kind of the three areas that we would focus on this time.
Okay, thank you.
That makes sense.
Excuse me, Councillor Armstrong?
I do appreciate getting the new numbers, especially because the ones we have are from 2019, which I'm sure will escalate. As well as, will we be re-looking at things on the plan now that we know about the king tides that are hitting? Because I don't think that was considered in the original plan, the king tides that are now hitting that would have a huge impact on the previous, what do you call it? Seawall, the new one through Departure Bay area. That was one of the questions I had. If it will include that, because I know that they're looking at even shutting Stanley Park down, walkway, because of all the issues with king tides, et cetera, and maintenance. So that would be one of my questions. My other question would be, could we have how many staff would be required, additional staff, if we did go ahead with this? Because we always forget to include that, and all of a sudden we build it, and all of a sudden the capital project comes along as, oh, guess what? We now need 6 more staff to ensure that this walkway is maintained. So I would like to know the number of staff that would be required, and that would go with, same thing with the Bevan as well. And if staff would prioritize what they think is, 1, 2, 3, 4 priority in the Bevan master plan for them. Those would be my my requests. And same thing again, if we do expand it, is there going to be more staff? Because, I mean, it's great to do all this stuff, then all of a sudden, these operational costs, which always are impacted, they never go away. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Manley.
Oh, thank you. I was just going to add, like original, you know, looking at these projects, the Bevan Master Plan, the budget is, you know, level of confidence in the cost is speculative at this point. So I would like to see those options, you know, what the different options are and approximate costs. So, you know, so that we may want to choose from a menu of the things that we add to Bevan Park now and the things that we might want to save for a later time. And then, yeah, it says the confidence in the cost for the waterfront walkway is low. And then, of course, what Councillor Armstrong was referencing is not just king tides, but it's rising sea levels. And so, like, planning for something like that, what, you know, have we already taken those kind of things into consideration? I know that there's a plan to stop erosion from the ferries and through the design, but yeah, curious about that. Whether we already have information. Did you want to add to that, Mr. Sims? No?
Just because the question's on the floor, I can quickly address it, Chair. Just that the current design for the waterfront walkway is a Green Shores approach, which allowed for storm surge, king tides, and rising sea levels, and it actually has quite a positive impact on the foreshore, potentially prevents significant erosion along the Solaire Bluffs, etc. So it's actually a good rehabilitative project that happens to have a walkway on top.
Right. Okay.
And Ms. Mercer wanted to comment.
Ms. Mercer, sorry, I see that you had your hand up.
Oh, no worries, thank you. So with recosting projects, there will be a funding ask for that because we'll need to go back to consultants and experts to do that. So we would recommend that we would come back to council with kind of a ballpark of what we're going to need and some suggested funding sources for that.
Great. Okay, I see no further questions. So we are voting on costing and scope of the waterfront walkway and the Bevan Park Master Plan. All those in favor? Any opposed? I don't think we have Councillor Brown with us any longer. I see none opposed. There was a third recommended motion in here that I think is moot. Okay, question period. Anyone? Welcome, Mr. Ainsley. You have a question on 6B1.
Yeah, I'll be very brief. I actually grew to 3 questions. So my first question was, I know Mr. Lindsay said that he wasn't able to announce, but I just wanted to know, because it sounds like you do have land that has been purchased or is going to be purchased for the South End Community Center. Is that true?
Through the chair, the reason we were able to put that in the report is because I think, as council is aware, we've been looking at multiple different opportunities in the South End, knowing that this was a long-standing facility, and we've been able to zero in on one site, and hopefully we'll be able to announce that site soon.
So you haven't purchased it, you just zeroed in on it?
All we can say is that at this point we've zeroed in on a site and look forward to sharing more soon.
Okay. A second question, unfortunately, Mr. Harding is here. I just wanted to ask, because he suggested that, and I didn't realize that the Oliver Woods had partially been funded by private funding. Do you know what the percentage of that was?
At the time, there was the development of the Longwood development, which is all of the development on Uplands Drive. So they did multiple amenities, including the construction of that portion of Uplands Drive. And my recollection was a $2 million contribution that came from the developers at that time. And that was back in 1993, I think, so a few years ago.
I don't know either way, but would a partial or even fully funded private, since some of the councillors seem to be willing to accept housing on top of it, would it be possible for this to be partially or fully privately funded?
I think in the report, and I tried to say that off the top of the meeting today, the numbers we put in there were based solely on 100% borrowing and 100% debt repayment from taxation. But absolutely, with any project, I think there'd be further opportunities, whether it's provincial or federal grants, whether it's partnerships, whether it's funding from other sources, including our own reserves. I think there's multiple future decisions that could be made from council. And as we said earlier, if the council's intent is housing, and depending on the type of housing, there could be opportunities for participation from private sector for sure.
Okay, sorry, and the third question, I mean, obviously it's speculatory, but if all of this funding was, or all these projects were built today, I just want to make sure I got that correct, that our debt by 2031 would be 680 million, was that correct?
Yeah, it wasn't 608, it was, or
With all the projects included though, because I thought that was the threshold.
Debt servicing or debt?
No, I know that, but I thought with all these projects, our debt, not what we can carry, but our full-on debt would be $680 million at 2031. I thought I heard that. Could be wrong, but I thought 664. So I was sort of right. And I'm just wondering, currently, I know our conference center is coming off the next couple of years, but currently, as of July 15th, 2024, what is our current debt load?
Through the chair, I do not have the amount today, but as at December 31st, it was 38.2 million.
38, okay, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, folks, that's it. Thank you. Seconded by Councilor Perino. All those in favor? Thank you. Meeting over.